Ladies and gentlemen, it's noon. We should start. I would like to welcome everybody on our symposium, which will be the most important event academic year and last years of our cooperation. First of all, I would like to welcome Professor Roberta, who have honor is with us, and some other people who will speak together. Professor Roberta from Louisville University, Professor Shongani from Bath University, Professor Manuel Silva from Portland University, and each of you who are all together with us, who came to meet to discuss. And also, I would like to welcome everybody who are on screen. My host, Professor Richard Strocher, who is also with us, and Takashi Satake from Japan, and other people who join such Zoom transmission and stream on YouTube. I would like to also thank you very much, people who support us to preparation of this event. Especially, we are a guest of Polish Academy of Science. I will speak in my short speech about this a little more, but it is a very historical place where people need to exchange knowledge, exchange important things, and have pleasure to meet each other to build relations. I would like to especially also welcome every people who represent different institutions. Please let me not introduce everybody in details because it will be small complicated. I would like to thank supporters, some marks who support us, Kotwica Górnik, Centrum Sportu Szamotuły, Med Consulting, Sadva, PTN, Kiev, and Bartko, who joined to us to prepare different elements. And now, after a short presentation, I would like to ask Professor Szumkami from Braz University to be a chairman together with Professor Manuel Silva, this part of Sympozjum.
Thank you very much for the kind invitation, Professor Konarski, and thank you for the chance to come to present in Poland. Really excited about today's opportunity. So today's symposium has been put together in conjunction with Dr. Maliny, Professor Maliny, receiving an award. He's getting an honorary doctorate here from the university. And today's symposium will focus very much on the topic of Bob Maliny's work, which is largely around the subject of growth and maturation. Now, Professor Maliny has been researching in this area for 4 to 5 decades and is widely recognized as the world's leading expert in this area. He's supported many of the scholars in this field, influencing their careers in many different ways. It's a fantastic opportunity to have the chance to introduce Bob today at the symposium. I hope that you'll enjoy the topics. We have some excellent presenters from around the world talking about some of the latest work in this area and what is becoming more and more of a hot topic in professional sports these days. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Professor Maliny to the stage to give his presentation. I'd like to give you a warm welcome to Professor Maliny.
Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you very much, Jan. Thank you very much to colleagues in Poland. For me, it's good to be back home again. And it's always a pleasure to visit Poland. Of course, some of you know my grandparents emigrated from Poland many years ago, so my roots historically come from this part of the world. This afternoon, I would like to spend the next hour or so talking about the significance of maturity-associated variation, especially in the context of youngsters in sport. I'll give a little bit of history because this topic has been of interest for many years, a little bit of the data, and then efforts to how can we address this data. So my objectives are 3. The early efforts on looking at biological variation in maturity status. It was done mostly in the context of child labor. When are children ready to go to work? And also in the context of what they called athletics in those days. Then I will share several examples, mostly from soccer and boys and from several studies of girls, looking at what we know about variation among young athletes in terms of their maturity status. And third, I'll briefly consider biobanding, an effort to address this maturity variation, which Sean has done considerable work in this area and he knows it much better than I. You go back to the 1890s and 1920s, there were 2 major concerns for children in the United States. One was child labor. And what you see here is children comprised about 6% of the workforce in 1880 to 1900. And youngsters 10 to 15 years of age, in 1880, boys comprised 32% of the workforce. And that went down, of course, to 6% in 1930. And the question was the readiness of these children for this physical work. And they realized chronological age, what didn't answer things for that. So the interest in index or indicators of readiness for physical work. At the same time, there was concern for the welfare of children. They call that boys' work. The basic question was, how do we keep boys out of trouble? This is what they really started to do. And many organizations began offering sport activities as part of these social programs. And at the same time, this was when we got the beginnings of interest in play movement among children. What can we do to keep children busy in their free time, especially in cities? And I'm born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. My whole cultural background is in the city. So this has always been a topic of interest to me. And both of these contribute to many programs, including, this is called the Police Athletic League. These are summer programs that the police department organized to help children out. I worked on them for 3 years. And then organized sports, mostly for boys. At the same time, sports for high school boys, not girls, boys, were developing rapidly. It was a downward extension from professional and college sports to the high schools, started by the boys. And eventually, the teacher said, we have to keep this here, otherwise you'll not have the boys in school. So to accommodate the boys' interest and keep them in school, they began organized sport, athletic associations and so on. So it's a highly organized system in the United States. On the other hand, the medical and educational professions had no interest in sport for young children. They said the main concern was it would eventually go down to younger children. And they were very much opposed to interscholastic sports for girls. But by 1914, many high schools were already offering sport programs for girls. In this context, a medical doctor of New York City schools, Ward Crampton, he was working with boys. He proposed the use of pubic hair. Now, many people who study growth of children, I think Jim Tanner originated our evaluation of pubic status. This was done well over 100 years ago. And he proposed pubic hair as an indicator of physiological age. First immature, pre-puberty, then the middle part is the most difficult, and post-pubescent. And this was put out, and the whole purpose was physiological age as an indicator of readiness for work. An attempt to figure out when biologically boys are ready to go to the workforce. But he also applied it to athletics. But athletics here was not sports. Athletics was you do a series of running, jumping, throwing fitness tests, and you compare them to other kids in other schools. And they grouped them by physiological maturity status for the comparisons. And at the same time, a physician, Thomas Morgan Roch, he proposed the use of hand wrist X-rays already. And keep in mind, radiographs were discovered in 1895. And here in the early part of the 20th century, he's proposing use of anatomical age of the hand and wrist to determine the youngster's fitness or readiness for school and for physical work. So this is what was going on. And he also recommended using them for athletics. So sport always touches this, but never really gets into the mainstream. And one of his colleagues eventually went in to complete the fifth of the hands. And then Bert Baldwin was a psychologist. He's unique that he began extending this to girls. For boys, he used the criteria Crampton. For girls, he focused on menarche. Is she premenarcheal or postmenarcheal, but in between stages of puberty? So this is nothing new. It's been with us a while. It's a matter of how we use it. We also recommended this should be the basis for physical training and directed play, and also child labor. Then in 1930, there was a White House Conference on Youth. And among the many issues they discussed, there are 3 or 4 volumes that summarize this. The many issues they considered were 2 dealing with sports. The expansion of sports from high school to lower ages, and overtraining. What's the effects of training on it? But I emphasize here, it's his fitness, his response, he is engaged. No mention of girls whatsoever. The emphasis was always on boys. Meanwhile, T. Wingate Todd began and developed the Atlas of Hand-Wrist Skeletal Maturation, which is the basis for the Gruelich-Pyle Atlas and every other method. And Earl Reynolds at the Fels Longitudinal Study specified the 5 stages of puberty for pubic hair and genitals, or breast development of pubic hair in girls. And Tanner simply modified these and popularized them. And while this is going on, you're getting a major modification in youth sports. Little League Baseball has an origin in 1939. A man named Carl Stotts. And what he did was modify the field, made the distance the boys throw the ball closer and the bases closer apart. In contrast to this. So this is a major modification. And Little League Baseball, of course, World War II happened, so it didn't expand. But after World War II, it grew very rapidly in the suburbs. You had 10 leagues in 1945, 300 in 1950, 35,000 in 1960. And the programs for girls did not go into 1974. From a personal perspective, I never played Little League Baseball. It never came into the city. I always played baseball on the same size field the professionals play on today. And I was a pitcher, and I know how my shoulder feels sometimes. Now, this is my parochial school team. I went to parochial school, Matka Boska Potrashen. And my father was the coach. But you see the numbers up here. He was in the 5th grade. 2 of us were, this is me, 2 of us in the 6th grade, 7th grade, another 7th grader, and all of these boys were 8th grade. These are men, we're boys. We were playing together. This boy, Henry Kosowski, he could put the ball any place you want. He was talented at it. He played college baseball, I played college baseball. So this is where we started. I was not quite 12 at that time. But this is what you see when you're working with youngsters in sport who we're competing against. Now, a relevance to the present discussion is the issue of maturity variation. Early on in the 1950s, 2 studies showed tremendous differences in maturity status of boys the same age playing in Little League Baseball. First, pubic hair. Prepubescent, 42. Post-pubescent, 51. It's like the men being the boys. Dr. Kroger, who was my major professor in anthropology, the skeletal age, he worked with T. Wingate Todd. And look at skeletal age, 9% were late, 45% average, 45% early. So you can already see this maturity bias in sports for boys. And this was Little League Baseball. These are among the first studies. And Krogman made a couple generalizations, which are very relevant today. The successful Little League ball player is old for his age, biologically advanced. He succeeds, it may be argued, because he's more mature, biologically more stable, and structurally and functionally more advanced. And you subsequently just replicated in any number of sports for boys. That was even noted earlier. But he also noted, what about the boy who is equally successful, but does not possess this heightened maturation advantage? Some small, late maturing boys have been made. He suggested these variables must be psychological, their motivation, their drive, and so on. He's saying you best put biology and behavior together and study this. And this is what we also call the underdog hypothesis. And evidence from sport, this was the work of Sean Cumming. Soccer players, the late maturing boys tended to show better adaptive regulation. They help make up for their disadvantage. So it's important that we're seeing the link between biology and behavior. How can we put this together? And when you're working with youngsters in sport, this is reality. Now let's look at some data. It's been with the donor for a long time. This is data for French soccer players. Greulich-Pyle skeletal age atlas. These were regionally elite players, 13, 14, 15, and so on. This is their chronological age, their skeletal age, and what you can clearly see here, 25 boys were late, 66 average, 46 early. This is an adolescent trend that you see, and this applies in virtually every study of boys in soccer. And of course, you got some boys who are already skeletally mature. And those of you who work with skeletal age, you do not appoint a skeletal age for a mature boy. You know he's mature, but you do not know when he became mature. This is the Tanner Whitehouse method. And keep in mind, the methods of skeletal age are very, very different, but the message is the same. The Tanner Whitehouse method, look how many boys you see who are advanced to maturity states. The number who are delayed goes down. So this is when you're working with 12, 13, 14-year-old boys, you've got a normal range of biological variation that you must be aware of. And here's another method, Feld skeletal age, exact same thing. You've got advanced boys, advanced to maturity status, basically begin to take over the sport. Which raises questions, we'll get into later on. And this is a longitudinal series of Portuguese players. The same boys seen at 11, 12, 14, and 16. You can see not much difference here. Come puberty, they're beginning to be more advanced. So even in a longitudinal series. Here, 4 boys at age 12 were already mature. And these are the 4 boys who attained maturity. So you can see the issue we're working with. This is consistent with the stage of sexual maturation. And this, in this case, is the testicular volume. The solid line is what the clinics see, is average. These are young soccer players, but come adolescence, they're all way above the chart. You see this trend beginning in puberty, where early maturing boys take over the game. And these were a series of Italian, Danish, and Spanish athletes. So if you put this together, the data for skeletal age suggests among 11, 12-year-olds, we have a broad range of variability. The 13, 14, the majority of the boys are average or early maturity. And this is repetitive, but it is real. And you see the same thing in size and strength, but not necessarily in skills. People forget that. You always have some highly skilled boys who can make it. You may not be the right size at the time. Now, another measure of maturity, but there's not that much information, is when do young athletes attain their growth spurt? The age at peak height velocity, the interval of maximal growth during adolescence. And these are several series of data for soccer players. You can see a little bit different than the skeletal age data. They're actually closer to average. They've got a very important message. Maturity status, when I see them, what they're like, and maturity timing. They're related, but they're not equal. And what's interesting here, if you look at the European data, all the Northern Europeans, this is Netherlands, Belgium, England, Denmark, Wales, they're slightly later than boys from Spain and Portugal. This is consistent with the gradient in Europe, that the Northern European populations mature a little bit later than the Southern European populations. And this is consistent. But the problem with these data, I think in many studies, they're beginning too late. They might be missing the early maturing boys. 10 years old. But some boys may start their spurt already down there. So this is part of the problem. And I use this as an example, a study I worked with colleagues in Belgium. We had 76 players from 10 to 14 who had 4 or 5 observations. We can only mathematically model the growth spurts for 33 of them. But we had 43 players with complete records. We could not model the data. But this is old data, right? But of interest, at observation 1, 25 of these boys were older and skeletally a year advanced. We probably missed the beginning of this work. And 18 boys were later maturing. We probably stopped the study too early to model the data. So this is a difficulty with longitudinal data. Now, this is Japan, this little sidelight. Their elite players mature earlier than our players in Europe. It's a very systematic gradient. Japanese youngsters tend to attain skeletal maturity earlier and their growth spurts earlier. So it's quite interesting. And the Japanese data are interesting because they have available in the school records. In Japan, the youngsters are measured beginning 7 years in spring, every year. So what many of the football clubs do, they go to the schools to get their records. And then when they get to the football club, they take a few more, so they cover the whole stretch of the growth spurt. Nevertheless, among boys 13 to 15 years, this is the interval during which many decisions are being made in terms of should we keep them or should we let them go? These are what we call selection decisions. This data for Portugal from Manuel's group. The boys selected for regional teams, no difference in age, but they're way ahead skeletally. A lot taller, a lot heavier, and they perform better. This is what coaches are doing. And this is data from Jan Bernarski here in Poland. Select and non-select soccer players. This is the indicated maturity based on percentage of predicted adult height, which will be talked about later on. Once again, the select players were older, advanced in maturity status, taller, heavier, more powerful. But look at the coach evaluation. The coaches evaluated them before the league was over, before the selections were made. The boys who were selected were way ahead on tactical skills and creativity. It raises the question, what are coaches seeing that we're not seeing? Because they presumably know what they're doing. Another question is, does this adolescent advantage persist into older ages? Right now, this is studied in the Netherlands, what they call selected and deselected. Deselected is a nice word for saying you don't make it. You're cut. And no differences in size, body composition, and so on. They did not have an indicated maturity status. But when they looked at all the data, 3 variables correctly classified about 70% of the selected players. Technical skills, tactical skills, and physiological skill. Dribbling, making decisions and your position, and speed, sprinting. So when we work with youngsters, we'll see some things, but in late adolescence is already a different game. So the maturity advantage of mid-adolescence, they likely help players make it, but they have limited relevance when you get to late adolescence. Another question is, what do we know about those young players who make it to the national or the regional level? It's another question you can ask. And this is some data from the Coimbra soccer study that we're working on right now. The boys were studied in 2003 to 2004, but we surveyed their playing status in 2014. And among the initial sample of 159 boys, 10 under 13 and 5 under 13 were playing regionally or nationally, and 15 were playing regionally or nationally as young adults. So a question of interest, what are the characteristics of the players who make it to that level? This is going to be interesting. Among the 11, 12-year-old players, those who made it to the national level were actually later maturing, It was a little bit shorter, a little bit lighter. So the maturity advantage is real, but does it persist over time? In terms of this capacities, but the small boys who made it nationally, they were more powerful, more agility, more speed, better endurance, and better ball skills. So this is a challenge for coaches. How do I keep that young boy who's highly skilled in the program? This is the older boys, 13, 14, it's a different story. They're a little bit chronologically older, not much advanced, but they're all advanced maturity. But they're taller, heavier, and really a little bit more mature. So when it depends on when you do the selection. And you can see the characteristics. And in terms of the players playing nationally, no difference here, but more agility, more speed, more endurance, and better soccer skills. So it's hard sometimes to teach this to people. Now, what are we looking at? And also this Portuguese sample, at the baseline observation, the coaches were asked to rank the boys on a 5-point scale, being very weak, reasonably good, and very good. Look at the boys who made it to the national level. This is at baseline observation. What are coaches seeing that we are missing with our growth measurements? I think we need to study the coaches. So they're seeing things we're not seeing. This is another sample of Portuguese players from a much more elite league. They were seen initially in 1998 and followed, we tracked them now 2014, 15. And of these, 7 were playing elite at the really national, international level. And a number were playing as adult amateur-wise. Once again, here's the elite players, not much difference in maturation here. But most adolescent boys are already at the same level. But those playing elite were taller, heavier, more powerful, and faster in sprinting. So this is something I keep repeating it, but there's more to making it than body size and so on. This is elite Spanish players from a very elite Spanish club. Studied in 2001, 2002, seen again in 2000, checked out in 2015. Of those 43 players, only 9 of them were in the first division. And this 9, no different chronological age. Look how tall they are, heavy. Look at testicular volume. They were men. They were adolescent boys. So it varies when you study them. In terms of maturity status, they were advanced to skeletal age by 2 years. And these were men, with all due respect. Now, this is another study from France. These are the characteristics when these boys entered the French academy. And then their future. 68 made it to professional, 90 didn't make it. So you look at the boys who made it to professional level, no difference in the size of maturity rather. Taller, heavier, greater working capacity, more powerful, not much difference in sprinting and anaerobic power. And in many of our studies, we don't measure all these things. They give us a more comprehensive picture. On the other hand, the study from Serbia is totally different. This is the work of Ostojic. He says, our comparative analysis suggests that soccer excludes early maturing boys and favors late maturing boys as level of performance increases. The problem with this study is twofold. The Tanner Whitehouse method, number 3, as opposed to Tanner Whitehouse 2, and there's a very narrow band to define maturity. And for those of you, I'll show us in a minute. Tanner Whitehouse 3 systematically reduced the skeletal ages. presumably to accommodate secular trend, but Jim Tanner missed it, with all due respect. And here's the data. 10 boys have got a very big sample, and it's all 6 were elite and eight on-time were still elite. So I'm not sure what he's doing about it. But here's the problem. Tanner White House 2 skeletal age. Tanner White House 3. You see, they systematically, for the same bone score, systematically reduced skeletal age by 1 year. Many people are not aware of this. 1 year. So the methods are not equivalent. And if you look at this, even better. With Tanner White House 2, 15 are late, 64 are late with Tanner White House 3. 133 are on time, 167. 167 are early, only 84. This is the problem. And one of the problems is our profession is many people in the sports sciences, with all due respect, do not understand skeletal maturation and process. So, in summary, I'll say this again, many in the sports sciences are not aware of the differences between methods of assessing skeletal maturation, let alone how to do it. Everybody uses Rubik pile. Question is, did you do bone by bone, or did you do just compare pictures? The various Tanner White House methods. Phelps, I think, is the most comprehensive method. They're related, but they're not equivalent. Tanner White House 3 is not consistent at all. And I took the liberty of converting his scores to Tanner White House 2 skeletal ages. 15.4 with Tanner White House 2, 16.2. 14.6, 15.3. 13.7, 14.6. It's purely a function of using the wrong method. Otherwise, the data would be consistent with the others. Well, let's talk about girls for a while. People know there's not nearly as much data. This is perhaps one of the first studies of female athletes. Study of Ostron on 30 elite teenage swimmers. Very comprehensive study, mostly exercise physiology. They were already taller and heavier than a Swedish reference at 7 years of age. Also at 14. Yet they were average in Asia America for Sweden. So you see a little bit different trends in female athletes. And most studies of female athletes tend to focus on what we call early entry sports, artistic gymnastics, swimming, they're very early entry sports. To a lesser extent, tennis and figure skating and diving. In the US, most study is on high school athletes. And the most concern has to do with Asia America in the data for high school athletes. So look what we have for female data. This is 2 studies. An early study from Czechoslovakia, the work of Novot in 1981, using a local version of the Rubik pile atlas. We've got equal numbers of late and early maturing girls. Most of them are average. Recent data from Portugal, using the Phelps method, you're seeing more average and early maturing girls. And many, of course, 15, 16 are all skeletally mature. For girls in swimming, one group here, more early maturing girls, but here, no late maturing girls, all advanced. So a little bit different than what you see. Tennis, this is work from former Czechoslovakia, pretty much evenly distributed. Recent work from England, short students, Myberg, very few late maturing girls in elite tennis. They're big girls. Artistic gymnastics, on the other hand, artistic gymnasts are short before they begin training. They also tend to have short parents. In addition, The sport selects for small body size and later maturation. And you get differential dropout. The taller girls drop out. And the shorter girls tend to persist and be late mature. Similar trend in boys, but the data are considerably less. This is skeletal age in female gymnasts. Notice 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years of age, they're all close to average. You get to adolescence with all skeletal age delayed on average. Up here, it's more difficult because many people include the mature girls, but you can see almost leveling off, favoring later maturation. In young girls, 5 to 8 years of age, only student sample. Most are average. Few early, a few late, few early. World Championships, this is the work of a colleague in Belgium. No advanced in maturity. Many immature, most are average and early. So you can see how the sport shifts once you become specialized like that. Differential dropout, the work of Roberta in Warsaw many years ago. This is the girls who persist. This is the girls who persisted in the sport, and the girls who dropped out of the sport. The dropouts are bigger. She followed them for several years. This is the record. These are dropouts. They don't differ in adult size though. Age at peak height velocity, those who persist, later those who drop out. The raw data are available in the report. That's how I calculated this. So age at peak height velocity in female gymnasts, 12, 9, 13, this is mixed longitudinal. I have here for you late maturing girls with short parents. Peak height velocity 12.9. Short normal, slow maturing girls, about 12.5. Girls with idiopathic short stature, 13. So really, gymnasts have the peak height velocity characteristics of short, normal, late maturing girls. So it looks like. Now, my personal perspective of gymnastics and sport in general, it's a combination of obviously skill, physical characteristics, and motivation. Variation among sports. But these are interacting with the demands and selective criteria of a sport. Now, who makes the demands? Adults, coaches, and trainers. In gymnastics, the judges. What are judges looking at? Judges tend to prefer late maturing girls, no doubt about that in sports. So, frankly, we need to study the coaches, the judges, and other adults involved, no doubt about that. We need to study those who drop out voluntarily and those who are excluded. All too often we focus on these people who make it. We want to get a better picture of what's going on. Now, despite the maturity sort of variation, we've been talking about it. It's real. How can we adjust for or modify sport to accommodate this real variation? To make competitions more equal, to improve training for individuals, to reduce the potential for injury, to help us evaluate players, enhance the opportunity for success. We can hold the player back until he catches up. Or we keep youth involved in sport, and many need sports. But the question is, what do you use as your indicator of maturity, and when do you do it? And the logistics, who does the evaluation and action? What are the qualifications? When do I do it? Beginning of a season or for tournaments? Was I limited in my research interests? But what's overlooked is how do you adjust for changes in maturity status during the course of a season? Just think of that, though. We see them one time, but no, you may see them 3 months later, they're different people already. And you must also consider the behavioral consequences of this. The term is playing up. This is a early maturing and moving to an older age level. This issue in the US, in many American towns, populations are getting small. And American football was a very popular sport in Texas. And many boys in 7th and 8th grade are being encouraged to play, not encouraged, forced to play high school football. So you got your boys in 7th and 8th grade, 13, 14 the most, to play American football with the 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds. That's called playing up. It's dangerous. And then playing down. What do I do with the late mature boy if I want to help him improve? How does it affect his head? That's a major issue. So you're so good, but you're not really ready yet. I want to keep you with 11-year-olds instead of letting you play with the 12 or 13-year-olds. Also, we must be aware of reality. This is the variation you see in a group of 11, 12-year-old soccer players. 11 to 13, skeletal age, 8 to 14. Pubic hair stages, 1 to 3. Look at the height, so it's a 30-centimeter difference. Look at the weights, double. This is reality. If we group them by pubic hair, stage 2, 11 to 14. Look at the heights and weights. They're all stage 2. He's double the weight of that boy at the end. Pubic hair 3, 11 to 15, 10 to 16. Look at the height differences. This is reality when you're working with adolescent boys and probably girls. Now, biobanding is the current effort to address this issue. What the biobanding refers to is to try to put boys together, most applicated in boys, in a specific maturity gradient. Maturity indicator is percentage of predicted adult height attained at the time of observation. This is a relatively new and widely used protocol. It was mentioned by, suggested by Alec Roach back in the 80s, but now it's very, very widely used. It's been applied primarily in soccer, usually among ages 11 to 15 years. This Alec Roach and Thomas, their equation does not require skeletal age, meaning it's non-invasive. But equations developed for the Fells longitudinal study, all American white children are all economically well off. And the heights and weights of the players in this study were measured. As applied, presumably people use decimal age. Not all studies indicate what they do. They measure the heights of the weights of the players. Parent heights commonly reported. And usually one parent reports the heights of the other parents. But we can adjust these for, for overestimation. However, in most studies applying it, they do not report the intensity of the samples. And anybody who watches European youth soccer, your groups are very well ethnically mixed. Indicated maturity is percentage of predicted adult height at the time of observation. And they grouped into bands. But bands are arbitrary. They're not fixed. You can use them to accommodate your own interests. But they can usually go less than 85%, 85 to 90, and so on. These are the bands defined in literature. 80 to 85, 86 to 90, they're called adolescents. So you're going to be very careful reading this literature. Some are relating the bands to peak height velocity. Unfortunately, they're predicting, but I'll get into that in a minute. And let's go to some research. This is Sean Cummings' work. Players in English Premier League academies, 11 and 14. Their heights were 85 to less than 90%. They played 11 and 11 games. And then they also played, the group was limited to this band. And after the study, Sean and the students did focus group. Get the youngsters discuss their experiences of playing with younger kids or with older kids. For example, boys advanced to maturity status. This is what we call a younger boy playing up. 11-year-old boy who's advanced to maturity compared to older boys. Older boy playing down. In other words, he's 14, playing with 12-year-olds. But the games were, they viewed the games as more physically challenging. They had to adapt their style of play and had to use their tactics and strategy. It changes your style. The boys who were older playing down, they thought the game was less challenging, but they liked the chance to use their skills. And they became leaders. So it's interesting. But the comments are interesting. It made me move the ball quicker than I would. I didn't use my strength to an advantage. You learn a lot more playing like this than you normally play with your age. This is a part of studies of young athletes that are looking at their behaviors. And in this case, integrating the behavior with variation in biology. Which to me, you must put those together always. And this is older playing now. In this case, in a normal game, I might be able to do a little bit. Every time I get the ball, there's a chance. You're more composed on the ball. There's not a massive 196 centimeter running up to you. This is why it's important to get the youngsters' perceptions in these modified sport protocols. Another study of older boys, looking at the performance. No difference in physical work capacity demands between a regular match and a bio-banded match. Identical. But in a bio-banded match, they had more shots, where they touched the ball more often, more passes, and passes on half of the field. So you're seeing strategic changes. This is still an experiment, but it's going on. Another one, same thing. They saw higher perceived exhaustion among players, advanced to maturity status. But they never really get into this. How much did it vary with maturity status? And this, to me, perhaps one of the most interesting studies from Sean's group on risk of injury during the estimated intervals of growth spurt. The boys were all 88 to 93% of predicted adult height. Their training was modified to accommodate their status in terms of injury. They had a significant decline in injuries from 5 to 1.3 per 1,000 hours of training. It's a major decline. And the burden of injury between seasons was reduced among boys who were estimated to grow more rapidly. Now, this is 7.2 centimeters. They're likely in their spurts, because growth spurts of soccer players, 6 out of 7 are between 9 and 10 centimeters per year. So if you're here, it's the boys who are rapidly growing in a spurt who are being protected in many ways. But of course, when you're working with short-term growth rates, you got to keep in mind there's a lot of measurement error variability. You got to be very careful doing this. Height varies with time of day. You're taller in the morning than you are in the afternoon, and season of the year. So you grow faster in the spring than you do at other times of the year. And you cannot measure the boys after training because they'll be shorter. You got to be very careful on that. What are the percentages of adult height available in longitudinal samples? Several studies, fellows in US, Europe, Russia, and soccer players. At takeoff of the growth spurt, they look like they vary about 79 to 81%. You look, the median is still in the same range. This is a lot more variable than age and peak height velocity. Peak height velocity, most cluster around 90 to 91%. That's when you're growing most rapidly during the growth spurt. Even the medians are in the same range. And it would suggest a conservative range makes perfect sense. So I would suggest we want to adapt to the takeoff. I would say takeoff less than 84%. Between takeoff and peak height velocity, 84 to 88%. 83 to less than 92% around peak height velocity, and then after that. Bands are flexible. You can use what you want, but this to me is conservative, but it may help. I don't know. And we've tried this with Portuguese players, looking at chronological ages and so on. Very quickly, this is the one. You can see a little bit less variation here, but notice the variation of skeletal age. But we're not eliminating all variability. Also, a little bit shorter in height. The peak height velocity, a narrow band, you see a narrow band here, still considerable variability, and a shorter height. So this is experiment. We're trying to evaluate them. Very few differences, but the differences, if there are any, are with the conservative bands, take off the peak height velocity and around the peak height velocity. But this considerable variation of skeletal age in all of this. Biobanding is still developing. It does not eliminate maturity associated variation. Bands are not fixed. You have to recognize the error with height prediction. Application of the sports are limited. Nowadays, there's another prediction protocol called predicted maturity offset. It's an effort to predict the time before peak height velocity. It's widely used and blindly used. No doubt about it. And this study, they used boys 11 to 13. They grouped them and they found majority granted games are more technically and tactically challenging, but less physical demands. Older players, they use predicted adult height and maturity offset. Limited impact on technical spatial integrated performance. But they used a small field. This is a comment from Sean. It's possible by using a smaller area, you change the style of play. That's perfect common sense. May have nothing to do with biobanding. Played on a small field. But the majority offset's got major problems. Colleagues and I have done analyzed several longitudinal data sets, 4 of them at least. Maturity offset is associated with reduced variation. It's missing a major part of the adolescent story. Moreover, it doesn't work with early maturing boys and doesn't work with late maturing boys. In the case of early maturing boys, the predictions are all later than observed. The late maturing boys, they're earlier than observed. And the same applies to girls. So, any of you like this maturity offset, be very careful. And make sure you understand what you're working with. In closing, for those of us working with children, keep in mind, variation maturity status is reality. We must be aware of it. And we must be aware of limitations and methods to address it. Also, keep in mind, sports systems are highly selective and driven by adults. The young athlete is often viewed as a commodity. It's a big business. Parents tend to have unrealistic expectations. But sports should be fun. If it's not fun, they'll stop playing. And most coaches don't realize these are youngsters with the needs of youngsters. With that, thanks to Manuel for sharing data. Thanks to Jan, and hopefully I didn't go on too long. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for this presentation and for making a very good lesson. It's got sense to listen and to do something more for all of us. I think that application of your information you show will bring fruits very soon. And now please Sean to introduce the next speaker.
Okay, so I believe it's there, is it? Perfect, but okay. Our next speaker is Barry Little, the guy who studied with Professor Maliny, has worked with him for a long period of time. And he's going to be presenting us some of his exciting research. And so I'd like to invite Barry up to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean, for the introduction, but that's not what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about Dr. Maliny and how he took me as a 21-year-old graduate student and turned me into somebody that survived the system today. The other thing I want to point out here is that I screwed this up. This should be 43 years. It was 43 years ago in September that we came together.
Is that right?
Yes. So what I did, because we're in an academic setting, I did an academic treatise of mentoring. And then what I did was had a second part, which I mislabeled here, where I actually go through the personal relationship. Believe it or not, people have studied mentoring. So there's a scholarly set, 10 objectives that you're supposed to achieve when you are a mentor for a PhD student. Willingness to share skills, knowledge, and expertise. And I'm going to go through these very quickly. The things that are grayed out, I'm not going to spend time reading. Jan had permission to distribute this widely so people can have it, but in the interest of time, I'm going to skip that. And we'll go down to what Dr. Maliny did. What he did was he shared everything he had. The first day I walked in, he gave me his entire dissertation data set and said, I want you to go change these. I want you to take Tanner Whitehouse 1 and convert it to Tanner Whitehouse 2. And I did, and we ended up publishing about a dozen papers on it. But the thing that would happen is that Bob would spend weeks with a single individual mentoring on a single topic. And what you found in other mentors is that they show the student once and they say, it's done. One and done, you didn't get it, you're too stupid, get out of here. He doesn't do that. Demonstrates a positive attitude and acts as a positive role model. He was always a champion for research. Helped me the first day that I was at the university get a computer account so that I could start working the second day. Maybe he was truly in love with research or just wanted me to get it done. Anyway, I took it as a good sign that his enthusiasm got me started, and I watched him do this with other students. And I was asking Eva just a moment ago, how many PhD students have you gone into it? I know I was like number 39 or something. Well, how many is it now? 50?
50 or 60.
50 or 60. Wow. So he has done it. It wasn't just me. He had no idea who I was. And I'm going to tell you when we get to part 2 about who I was when he met me. I came out of the blue. He had no idea who I was. Takes a personal interest in mentoring, in the mentoring relationship. Bob was always there, and he was always talking about how to work with the mentees. And sometimes you have teams that work together. I have one special area that I worked in, quantitative genetics. He had me work with people who needed help with their quantitatives, but they were good with other kinds of analyses. And after attending only one lecture, such as the one we just heard, one knows that Bob possesses the attributes of a great teacher and trainer. He's not just a teacher and trainer. He trains people that do national surveys. We've done that in Korea, Italy, the United States, Mexico, and Guatemala. Is that correct? Did I leave out anything?
Plus the US.
Well, US. Exhibits enthusiasm in the field. Well, after seeing this presentation that we just did, you can tell that he really is into this topic. And the thing that I'm going to point to here is this. I'm on the promotion tenure committee at our university for the School of Public Health and School of Medicine. And those people are expected to have, to get to associate professor, they're expected to have 8, a score of 8. And Dr. Maliny is at 68,000 right now. I think that's update. So what's in your brochure is slightly out of date. I know I did it for the letter, but values ongoing learning and growth in the field. He is if not the expert in his field. He does the majority of the work in his field that's new. One of the things I wanted to ask him, we didn't get a Q&A, but what I wanted to ask him was, how would you adjust skeletal age for secular trend? How would you adjust skeletal age for the effects of secular trend?
I don't think you have to.
Then TW3 was not necessary.
There's no precisely within this.
So, all that other stuff aside, he ranks in the top 0.1% of scientists who have published, being cited over 68,000 times. There's one person who's at 1 million, and that's the top. Provides guidance and constructive feedback. This is something that is extremely important that he did that I watched other professors not do. When you go out and you try something and you come back and it's wrong, your professor is supposed to help you figure out what you did wrong and do it correctly. The majority of the people in the department where I trained with him would not help you. They would tell you once and it's over. I'm not going to look at your stuff anymore. I'm not going to give you any guidance. Not going to give you any constructive feedback. Yeah, anthropology. Oh, and I didn't have it on there, but I'm also a professor in anthropology. So, Dr. Malina's students who followed his advice and counsel recognize their fields that are successful. And I'm picking on a couple of specific people here who did not follow his advice, who were absolute pans, failures in their areas. I'm not going to say a name because this might be recorded and might go out, but I'll give you the initials of the absolute perfect example of this. The person's initials are ET. Got it? So following his lead is probably the most important thing that any student can do if you were lucky enough to train in him. There were those who were obstinate, thought they could go their own ways, but it was not a productive thing. Respected by colleagues and employees at all levels of the organization. Well, over 60,000 citations, 4 honorary doctorates that were not the result of donation money. I think really pointing out how well respected you are. And this is something that really irritates me. That's it's like, well, it is, but I agree. And they walk out and call themselves doctors. Dr. Malina's mentorship is discussed in number 1 through 7, show that Bob can set goals and effectively achieve them. And this is something that I discussed with Eva also before this. I don't ever recall in the 43 years that I've known him that he missed a grant deadline or a manuscript. That wasn't just a standard he held himself to, he held us to it. You're a day late, you lost a letter grade. You're 2 days late, two letter grades. 4 days late, you got an F for getting the hell out of here. That's what he was. So, values the opinions and initiatives of others. He has worked on large national teams, as I mentioned. He's always respected student attempts at solving problems, and this is where he is set apart from the rest of the crowd. Other PhD mentors, when you come in with the wrong answer, they just say, red line through it, send it back, do it again. When I was finishing my dissertation, he sat down and edited every word. He cared. So the final thing that scholars have on their list of what makes a good mentor is motivates others by setting a good example. I think that everything that we've talked about here sets a very good example. And I just want you to understand what this is, because it's kind of difficult to understand these different indices. So what this means is he's got 119 articles that have been cited at least 119 times. This means that he has 585 articles that have been cited at least 10 times. So part 2, the personal perspective. I was in Indiana and I was a teaching assistant for an osteologist. And when it came time to do my thesis, Dr. Whitehead knew Alex Roach and made an appointment for me to go over and talk to him about working on his project. And what they were doing at the time was reevaluating Tanner Whitehouse, and that's when they were going on to the Roach method. I interviewed and met this fellow, and he was a prickly pear, I'll tell you that. He was a cactus for sure. And he was kind of sharp with me. He said, if you expect to go anywhere in this field, drop the primatology interest and concentrate on humans. I followed his advice. Now, this is the thing that got me started. And I hope everyone knows who John Himes is, because he's worked with Bob a lot longer than I have. He was your first one? Anyway, John said, if you're going to get a PhD, go do it now, because they will not get any easier or any cheaper. And the reason he told me that was because I was going to come over there in the summer, and they were going to get grant funding, and I was going to work as a research assistant, paid 3 cents an hour or something, and study Tanner White House, and also look at the measurements between the epiphyses. So within 1 month of meeting John Himes, I was admitted to the PhD program at Austin. Dr. Maliny had gotten me a doctoral fellowship, and I drove from Indiana to Texas to start the PhD program. 20 miles north of Austin, I called Bob, went to his house. I was still in a homemade wooden trailer, like the hillbillies, behind my car. Had everything in it, my books, my dining room table and everything. And he had gotten me an apartment to Lynn from a graduate student who was out of town. And then he later on helped me get an apartment of my own. But this is the thing that really, I couldn't even figure out a way to put it in the slide. But I had my entire life savings of crap, of junk on that trailer. He brought an army of graduate students over. I thought it was going to take me hours to get this stuff upstairs to go on the 3rd floor, no elevator. He came over, he brought these people. We were done in less than 20 minutes. Moved me in, set me up, got rid of the trailer. So not only was he taking care of me, he was making sure that I didn't work myself to death. Anyway, after I was situated, well, on that, you wanted me to work elsewhere. So after I was in the apartment, Bob took me back to his house, and we sat and had some shots of vodka, and I started getting acquainted with him. I thought, wow, this is a pretty neat guy. He's really mellow, really easygoing. This is going to be a fun time. It's pretty easy. Not going to be a lot of requirements that I have to make. Well, shoot, that was it. That was wrong. At 9 a.m. the next day, I was in his office, and he turned straight to business and laid out my plan for the next 4 years. First thing he said, and he wasn't smiling. He said, "You will finish in PhD, and you finish your PhD in 4 years because I will not support you after 4 years." That was not an idle threat, because I saw other people go on and try to do 5, 6, 7-year PhDs with him. They don't have PhDs now, not from him. So I was a little surprised because he'd been this really mellow guy sitting around drinking vodka. And I was thinking, wow, I'm thinking along with this guy pretty good. But this is extremely important. Rudderless means we don't know where we're going. Graduate students usually don't have any idea what they're doing. They want to go research the universe, and they don't even have any data. So my fellow graduate students with other professors got no such guidance. They got no deadlines, nothing. One of Bob's friends was the dean of the graduate school, Livingston.
Yeah, Bill
Livingston. Anyway, he hired me to do little jobs for him. One of them was to look at all of the people in the different departments that had graduate programs and how long it had taken them to finish. And I put this in here just to show how important it was for Bob to put a limitation on it, because I'd probably screwed around for another second. This guy, his mentor, had no control over him, gave no advice. 27 years to finish his PhD. 27 years. But he did finish it. Anyway, this was excellent guidance, and it kept me from languishing in graduate school. But Dr. Maliny could not have read the academic treatise of membership presented in #1 because that thing was only published in 2022. That 10-item list there was only compiled and published this year. So he has not seen that, but he touched on every one of those points and drove them home. graduate program. What happened? Okay. Graduate programs that have these long-term graduate students are sending a signal to the administration for mentorship. And what Dr. Livingston did at the University of Texas was put in a couple of guidance rules so that people could not sit there for 27 years. Number one, after you've been there for 7 years, your course credits expire. And you can't retake them and get credit again. So if you've taken all the courses and they all expire, you're not going to get a degree. And that's not idle threat, because I've seen it happen. The summary of my first day with them was, you're going to take these 3 courses in fall of 1979. Your dissertation will involve the Oaxaca project, because I have NSF money to study Oaxaca. You're going through your dissertation on the genetic component of growth and growth velocities. You'll pass your first doctoral exam in genetics at the end of year 2. By the end of year 3, you'll pass your doctoral exam in human application child growth. Your support will expire 4 years from now. You must graduate in 4 years. That's it. You told me that. I know. Now, after all of that, and I'm scared, shivering, and sweating in the corner, then he brings me out and says, okay, since you've got some familiarity with Tanner-Whitehouse skeletal aging, I want you to take my dissertation data set that's in TW1 and convert it to Tanner-Whitehouse 2. I figured, I'd probably whip that out in a couple of weeks. I spent 18 months in this project. And I was talking to him last night about this. He had a reputation at the computer center. When I went over and told him I was getting all these errors, I couldn't run the program I'd written to do these transformations. They said, oh, you must be a Maliny student. I had used 1,068 if statements. And back in 1979, we didn't have the power of a smartphone, much less that. So I had to do it at midnight and with special permission, but got it done. Anyway, so I'd already seen some of this and had a little bit of experience with it, because I knew at Fellows they were measuring the radiolucent proximal distant epiphyseal gap to estimate skeletal age. And I think that became the knee skeletal age protocol.
Knee first.
Yeah. This is something that you cannot buy, you cannot steal, you cannot invent, you cannot lie about. Dr. Little's major professor was the well-known researcher Robert Maliny. They can be expected he will execute the project successfully. I got that on my first NIH grant review in 1989. And then again, in this cycle, this cycle, this cycle, this cycle, this cycle, this cycle. You're not dead and you're well known. So you're alive and famous. And I think that Bob believed that he had insulted me in some way, because he talked to me about this later. But he did say this, exactly this. Do you remember saying this, Bob? Since my retirement, I've noticed you have more publications and citations. You remember that? You did say that. Well, I tested it. And sure enough, your mentorship extended 40-some years out in time from when I was taught by you, because my publications and citation indices increased 2.3 fold from before your retirement to after your retirement, which means I might use you. Anyway, since his retirement, my publication record has more than doubled. And then Dr. Maliny used his high scholarly status to make me a fellow in the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And just to give you a feel for what it means, there are 3,300 fellows of AAAS, 125,000 members. So all we need here is someone who inspires us to do better than we know how to do. And for me, that was Bob. And here he is. This is in his study on the range. And on the back porch at my house, this is Eva's favorite picture. I believe. Before COVID-19, Dr. Robert Maliny and Dr. Eva Maliny would visit us in Kentucky at least annually on their trip to the Maliny reunion. And because Jan told me to keep it to 20 minutes, I took out all the stuff I had. Pictures of you with your brothers, pictures of you with all your family, and it was too much. So it was 90 slides. I had to take it out. Anyway, it's not the end of the work, just a map to separate the days. Dr. Maliny and I will continue to collaborate on research and publish. You are my inspiration, and thank you for being a wonderful friend and teacher. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bert, for this amazing lecture about Professor, our mentor and friend. I think it's a special important point for youth. We know Professor, we respect him, and with us we have a lot of young people, Erasmus students from different countries, and I'm very happy that you are here. And of course, a lot of our students and our PhD doctors and our colleagues professor who still have a chance to support like our mentor others, and it's beautiful to be all together. And now, before we'll take a little break to a little cool down after these two amazing presentations, I would like to ask, have you got any question? If not, thank you very much for this part. After 20 minutes, probably we'll invite you to next part of our symposium. And now I would like to invite for short break, for short rest. We prepare some snacks and to a little return. Thank you very much. We'll be here in 20 minutes. return energy and willing to listen and discuss. At this moment, we would like to introduce to listen to me short-term lectures, which are continuation of main lecture of Professor Maliny. And as a first, I would like to invite Professor Manuel Silva from Profesora University to present his part of this.
Thank you, Sean, and good afternoon for all of you. I'm delighted to be here. Obviously, today is a day this week, these next days for Professor Maliny. I met in 1997, probably 25 years ago, and I had a chance to experience one semester in Michigan State University. I'm trying to summarize the rationale and what we have done over the past 20 years, and I will put my last 20 years in the next 30 minutes. And fortunately, I also like to mention Maria Eugenia Panha-Reis. I met her while in Michigan State, and her background is from physical anthropology, and she came 2 or 3 times to Coimbra, and she really taught us how to manage the methods to determine skeletal age. And Maliny Figueiredo is my first PhD student, and with all the certitude at the time, we started in 2004, a longitudinal study, and fortunately, Professor Roberta Maliny accepted to supervise Antonio with me. So let me have a short table of contents. Youth sports was gaining visibility in the literature, and it's obvious that competitive and organized sports is probably the main form of physical activity. When we talk about youth sports, probably we are also talking about exercise, pediatric exercise science. And this manuscript that was published in Pediatric Exercise Science by Roberta Maliny and Peter Kaczmarzyk clearly shows that a substantial percentage of moderate to vigorous physical activity is explained by competitive and organized sport. And this was consistent with a study from Aristides Machado Rodrigues, among my first PhD students, and Sean Cumming received him in math. So that's my part of my career is the connections I made while in Michigan State 20 years ago or more. And obviously, we need to start and make clear the concepts, and growth refers to changes in body size with implications on proportionality and composition. That's clear for all of you. And this manuscript has more than 20 years, is part of a special issue that was organized by the group from BASIS, British Association for Sport and Exercise Science, General Sport Science. And Thomas Riley invited several experts in different areas of sport sciences. And here, the data was from Portugal, who met Luís Horta. He acted several years in the Portuguese Soccer Federation, sent the X-rays to the United States, to Michigan, and Professor Maliny plotted that it was very clear that from 11-12 infantiles, 12-13 initiates, and 15-16 years of age, juveniles, the Portuguese players tend to plot in the 50th percentile. So they are almost, they look like the general population. And regarding body mass, after 14 years of age, they do not look like anymore the general population. They carry more weight for stature. They tend to carry more body mass for stature. And maturation explains a large portion of inter-individual variability during growth spurt, the second decade of life. And here it is very clear, infantiles, the red box, in blue, initiates, and green, juveniles. Equal number of delayed and advanced, Portuguese data. And at years that overlaps with the age at peak high velocity, more advanced players than delayed, and delayed became residual, almost 80. juveniles. And this is cross-sectional data. Very difficult to have a causal effect. But the hypothesis was, are coaches and the adults in youth sports doing a selective choice of the players who continue and who are promoted? And it was very consistent with data published in 1991 at the European Journal of Applied Physiology, a group of physicians from Bologna. And they used a different instrument for the same concept, growth and maturation. They measured testicular volume with a horchidometer. Until the age of 14, the general population, the control group, was very similar in that variable, but after the age of 14, the magic age of 14, soccer players present larger size for the tests. Very consistent with the previous. So we start to prepare about 20 years ago, and the early studies were done in basketball. I used a very traditional battery with anthropometry, functional capacities, and this was my first publication. Basketball players within a single year, age group, 14 years of age. Those were classified in pubic hair development stage 3, compared to those who were classified at stage 5. They were shorter, these ones, by 17 centimeters, and they were thinner, 31 kilograms. And no differences between the groups on manipulative skills, motor skills. So maturation, sexual maturation, is not explaining the difference between groups on motor skills, which I believe is very important for talent identification. And one amazing aspect, for those tasks like hand grip, the ones who are advancing to attain better scores. But for aerobic fitness, the opposite. We are not paying attention in all functional capacities. This is a muscle function, and hereby are the main organic systems. The lungs, the heart, the metabolic pathway, the aerobic metabolic pathways. And so we started to develop some research. This is central. Many colleagues in their program said, we are only interested in the past 5 years. I don't agree. This special issue was published in 2000, and you see, this is I would say, a dream team of researchers. Kate Davis from Sheffield University talked today in the morning. He also, Elson was the first paper in soccer about relative age effect. Was in the same issue. And in 2003, we published in Tartuensis, to industry might come to Coimbra and said, you may publish your cross-sectional data at Tartuensis. We measured 112 soccer players, all males. And infantiles, 11, 12, initiates, 13, 14, juveniles, 15, 16, and juniors. This is how organizing soccer is in Portugal. I don't know if it's exactly the same ages and the same number of stages in Poland. I don't know if it is dictated by FIFA or not. And it was very clear for us that for initiate, the magic age group of 14, being advanced in terms of pubic hair development, corresponds to significant differences in almost all functional capacities. And consistently with basketball, wall pass and dribble, manipulative skills were not affected by sexual maturation. But obviously, sexual maturation has problems. It's not the best method. So we continue to what we have studied and what we read from someone who knows more than us. And that paper was published in European Journal of Applied Physiology, very consistent. Those players in stage 5 were taller or heavier. And we start to prepare the longitudinal database, and we have some genes in our head particularly, we have the chance to visit Salamanca. Salamanca is in the border, is in Spain, in border to Portugal. And we drove to Salamanca at the time was the European city of the cultural capital. We met Thomas Riley, was an interesting person. I expect you agree with me. He was really someone who did a nice job in Liverpool. At Liverpool, John Road. I don't know if you agree, Sean. I think he promoted very good students.
Yes.
That have now Mark Williams and all this. And we come to him, don't use the Loop Leger test. It was 20 meters shuttle run, continuous. In 2002, we did not assess the work of Jan Beinsvold in southern Denmark. And sorry. And he said, no, use the yo-yo intermittent test. And we decided a simple study is a study for a master student. Continuous 20 meters, two times 20 meters without stopping. And here it is 2 times 20 meters and running and 2 times 2.5 meters walking. The intermittent protocol was not correlated more than moderate with the continuous protocol. And apparently, just the stop changed. The best ones here are not exactly the best ones in that protocol. So, the intermittent was considered more specific for soccer. The next decision was how to evaluate the short-term maximal effort. The one before was middle term, 10, 12 minutes. Now, 7 seconds. One 35-meter sprint with a zigzag costs you 7 seconds. And this is a zigzag. Sorry. One colleague, Amando Santos, did the PhD in Neil Armstrong and wanted to use the wing gate. And the wing gate is 30 seconds. 7 times 6 seconds, 35 meters costs you 6 seconds. So the length of time was equivalent, running, cycling, different muscle patterns of movement. And the fatigue index in the wing gate test was unrelated. Fatigue is specific with running with the 7 times 35 meters. So we adopted the yo-yo and we adopted the repeated sprintability. One paper that was published in 2005 in Sports Medicine summarized all repeated sprint protocols, which I believe is very interesting. And this paper is from João Duarte, one student that was also supervised by Professor Maliny. He was trying to demonstrate that we need to approach what is specific for soccer. Repeated dribbling, not repeated sprint, is the same sprint but with the ball. And the question is, the same effort without and with the ball, and if you can, the best without the ball are the best with the ball. And this is Eusébio, the best Portuguese player ever. There's a huge debate if Eusébio is better or not than Cristiano Ronaldo. And here, one step, one touch, one step, one touch, one step, one touch. I think it's interesting to have alternative right, touch ball with alternatively with the right and left foot.
some creativity of tests for the kids. Obviously, we don't have a magic battery for juniors, 17, 18 years. For juveniles, we probably need specific batteries for different stages of long-term sport participation. This, without opponents, this will be nice for infantiles probably. Only for juniors, you do not expect to have a talent identification program for juniors doing that task without opponents. And we collected 4 tests from the Portuguese Federation. They appreciate that. The Portuguese Federation was using those tests in blue. And in a book by Human Kinetics, Measurement and Evaluation for Physical Education, we collected 2 more items. And I know that the group from Groningen, Ghent, they have more tests. One good master student may combine what is in the literature about manipulative skills and run a principal component analysis to see if we can obtain a good battery. I think in many studies, the battery is intuitive. We need to support that with the metrics. And this is our final battery. Number of touches, number of passes in 15 seconds, accuracy, shooting accuracy, and ball control. Ball control, it is a circuit, and we use those for ball tests in our Coimbra study. So, maturation, one student, his background was not from sports science. He was radiology, he worked in radiology. He collected 311 films and examined it with FELS and TW. And although the correlation coefficient was nearly perfect, very few cases were within the plot in the identity diagram, in the identity line. So the 2 methods are correlated, but FELS overestimates skeletal agent compared to TW3. This was in 2006. And the early descriptive studies, this one was published 126 times. Very consistent with basketball. Infantiles, initiates 30-14, closer to age-epic velocity. The same trend, but more pronounced, 21 kilograms, 22 centimeters. The same trend, but the magnitude is more pronounced when we examine the ages closer to age-epic velocity, maximal growth. And remember, I talked in basketball that those who are in stage 3 attain better scores in the progressive aerobic cardiovascular endurance run test than those who are in stage 15 in my basketball study consistently. Those infantiles that were classified as late, they perform more meters in the intermittent yo-yo test compared to the early maturers, 500 meters more. We need to explain that. And consistent with sexual maturation and the continuous test, with skeletal maturation and the intermittent test. The same question with different concurrent decisions about the methodology, but the data, the results were very, very, very consistent and clear. One clue was the co-contraction. Motor units that are being recruited with no need, excessive recruitment of motor units. We call that co-contraction. And closer to maximum VO2, the young participants, they have more co-contraction. They do not have economy, running economy, like you compare to cars that start in Poznan in direction to Warsaw. They go in the same speed, but one is consuming much more liters of gasoline than the other. The kids, they consume differently the energetic substrate. And Reinhard Philippers from Ghent, he compared a short sample of early mature soccer players against a short sample of late matures. And he expressed strike length as percentage of leg length. So theoretically, it's independent of body size. At three different velocities, 8 kilometers per hour, 9.5 and 11, consistently late matures, they have a longer leg length, the strike length, expressed as percentage of leg length. So they are more economic. Make total sense. And our prospective study was the coach want to invest in those players they perceive have more potential. And we compare it in Coimbra and Aveiro, in the Midlands of Portugal, those who were selected for the regional teams and those who only participate in organizing sport in the clubs. And it was clear that discriminant function analysis identified body size, egg orientation, speed, agility, no maturation. Maturation does not explain those who are selected by the coaches for the regional teams. I would say success in soccer is a combination of biology, coachability, and trainability. Years of training are among the 6 predictors. Since we started data collection in 2004, we waited for 4 years, and we did, where are playing the players in our sample? The decision was those who drop out, the ones who are still playing the same club, and those who are attracted to a club that is acting in a high level, the elite group. And note, the elite group, heavier, taller, perform better in all tests. And in contrast to the groups of maturation I presented before, now manipulative skills were sensitive to the effect of skeletal maturation. So we need really to invest in manipulative skills to identify the ones who have more better potential. Very consistently, the group of the Serbian players, the Serbian authors, they suggested that those who were early matures were less likely to attain La Liga, Premier League, Bundesliga, Italy, and France. 2 problems. They did it, they used it TW3, and they adopted a band of 0.5 years, which is polemic. We start to assess skeletal age. Our data was apparently consistent with one from Serbia, but we use it fails and they use it TW3. Fortunately, we have good contribution between TW2 and TW3, between FELS and TW2 in Annals of Human Biology 2007, if I remember, with data from Real Madrid. You have done that. And the basis is the same. The same film, the same X-ray could be assessed 2, 3, 4 times with the different concurrent protocols. Shortly, TW3 supposedly the mature states is attained 16.5 juveniles. The transition from juniors to senior is 18, which is exactly the decision from the American method, the FELS. So it seems that the conclusions depend from the methodological option of the authors. And we are now assessing our students' data quality. What is the observer-associated error? There are a lot of errors. It's much more difficult to assess the carpal than the long bones. And in many studies, we are using just the rouge version of TW2. Obviously, sports, infantiles, initiate, juveniles, and juniors, the carpals were closed already. But in other sports like swimming or gymnastics, we need to gain expertise how to assess meta. It are really difficult to measure. And we also did with Table 2. This is a paper from Paulo Sousa Silva that is also being supervised by Professor Roberta Maliny. And this data is from Diogo Martinho, who was in the morning attending this conference. And Diogo Martinho used Grulish Pi. Grulish Pi, we bought the book. The book is not clear. You can do an overall approach. which many persons do, which was not recommended by the original author, but we don't know how he managed those balls who already attained mature state. When I was measuring someone with 15 years, probably 7, 8 balls were already mature. They should enter or not to calculate the overall skeletal age. We are discussing that. Many persons in Portugal, it is possible to ask or obtain the approval of the ethics committee to measure soccer players, basketball players, swimmers, and so on, and include in the study a film of the left hand. But in other countries, not possible. I don't know how it is in UK. In other countries, not possible. And many adopt non-invasive approaches, methods. And this was the most cited paper in 2014. It assessed the interrelationship among invasive skeletal age and somatic maturity indicators. The conclusion is very obvious. Between somatic skeletal and somatic maturity indicators, very modest the correlation. And the same occurred between Camis-Roche method and the maturity offset, very modest. The coefficient of correlation 0.34. The superior 0.34 is 9% of overlapping variance. Very modest. So finally, it was a longitudinal study. I presented the descriptive, prospective, retrospective, and now the developmental studies. We examined longitudinal trajectories. Now we are not examining points. We take our attention to lines. Each player is a line, and it is possible not to explain line. The colleagues from Groningen, Netherlands, Marijn Kemsen and her group, they conclude that amateur and professional soccer players, they have different trajectories in speed, agility, and jumping. They explain those who attain professional soccer based on those 3 characteristics. And we use it multi-level modeling. It is a combination between regression model and crystal component analysis, different time moments. Skeletal age does not explain repeated split abilities that Marijn Kemsen found was relevant to attain professional soccer, failing to enter in the model. And very clear, this data is from Ghent, the group from Renat Philippers and Roel Vayen. They came to Pima to examine their own data. And motor coordination given by KTK was a longitudinal predictor of the yo-yo intermittent test. Motor coordination is a crucial and decisive aspect to be trained at these ages. And consistently, the same happening to jumping performance. 2 tests from motor coordination battery are longitudinal predictors of jumping performance, very consistent. And finally, before I finish my talk, we are now assessing the extensors and flexors concentric contractions and extensions and flexors eccentric. It is the extensors in eccentric contraction. Okay? Concentric, eccentric. Longitudinal data showed us that the inter-age slope is very different in the extensors compared to the flexors. Annual increments are more pronounced in the left than in the right, which means that we have a problem. Per year of chronological age, soccer players increase 5.4 Newton meter. It is the unit of measurement for isokinetic strength. And for flexors, they just increase 2.7. So they become more unbalanced between the anterior and posterior muscle groups of the knee.
And this has impact what the physiopathologist said, anterior posterior pelvic tilt. Now I want, and I'm available these next days to discuss a female soccer project. My idea today is to present how we organize our project. It was very pleasant to do my best doing 15 years in a unique project. My life became much easier. The professor guides the students in his own projects instead of the supervised students in ideas of the students. Obviously, the student has much more creativity than me, but for me it's easier to supervise students in my ideas. It's much easier. Thanks for your attention. Thanks, Sympozjum. I was gratified. Take longer than 30 minutes. Okay.
You know, like always, personal time. Thank you very much. Thank you for that great presentation. I think that concluding presentation, it's amazing that we can observe how it was built step by step, question from one question to another question, because it is a clue to find answer on question and find answer on next one. It is
Very simple, please.
yes.
Please.
Simple is the best. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce Mr. Sean Coming from the Department of Health and Bath University, and invite him to present.
Yes. I have mine. Sean has his own. This is
Oh, shit. I'm sorry.
yeah.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much for the kind invitation to come to Poland and the opportunity to share stage with some excellent presenters. Now, the earlier presenters have talked a lot about whether it's important to be early, on time, or late. But another area of growth and maturation that we're focusing upon in England just now is this issue around the growth spurt. So that period of time when adolescents are growing very rapidly and how we can best manage the athletes through that point of time. And today I'll share a lot of the work we've been doing with the Premier League, many soccer clubs in England, but also ballet and gymnastics, where the growth spurt is also going to be a problem. Okay, so with the adolescent growth spurt, I think the good thing is most people here have been through the adolescent growth spurt. It's that period of time in adolescence where we suddenly grow rapidly in terms of our height and rapidly in terms of our weight. And of course, there's a difference if we stretch the children up first, because that growth spurt in terms of height that operates first, and then we put the mass on about 6 to 9 months later. Now, there are some differences as well between boys and girls. Boys and girls will all go through the growth spurt. But when it comes to mass, those boys are largely putting on gains in muscle mass, whereas the girls will predominantly be putting on gains in fat mass. And this has implications for both performance and also for injury. Now, we are taking regular assessments of growth and maturation in the academies, which we do in England from the ages of 9. We can start to look at the growth velocity, so how fast children are growing, and actually monitor when those growth spurts occur. Now, if we look at children from the ages of, say, 3, 4 through to 9, there's not a lot going on in terms of growth. It's very steady, very predictable, about 4 to 5 centimeters per year. And this makes sense because the investment at this point is in terms of the brain. It's neural development, cognitive skills, motor skills that we are investing in. But once it comes to the period of puberty, that's where we get the rapid increase in growth. And that will occur first for females and then later on for the boys, declining at that point until we get to maturity. Now, if we're measuring weight, we can also plot the growth spurt in relation to weight. And again, very similar pattern here. If we look at children, relatively steady growth, maybe about 2 to 3 kilograms per year in terms of rate of growth. So nothing exciting going on. But all of a sudden, about 6 to 9 months after we get the growth in stature, we get the sudden growth spurt in terms of weight. And of course, for the girls, that's going to be largely fat mass that we are putting on at this point of time. And for the boys, it's going to be muscle mass that they're experiencing. And of course, the key thing we wanted to do is try to identify when athletes enter those zones, but also maybe predict when they go into those zones as well. Because as you'll see later on, the age at which children enter the growth spurt can vary quite considerably. Now, as I mentioned, it's important to understand the growth spurt. And the growth spurt occurs in what we call a distal to proximal gradient. So the first part of the body to grow will be the feet. So you'll see very young children, they've got big feet, they look like clowns. Then the next part is the legs. And children just before puberty, big feet, long legs like giraffes. Very, very short torsos, because the torso is the part that grows during puberty. So growth occurs in a distal proximal gradient, with different parts of the body experiencing the growth spurt at different times. But here's the important part. The growth spurt is highly variable in terms of the age at which it occurs. And there may be 5 to 6 different years difference between children of the same age at when they actually enter the growth spurt. And again, the child has no control over this. Most of when the growth spurt occurs is simply down to genetics and environmental interactions. So if your mother was an early developer, there's a good likelihood you're an early developer. Father was a late developer, you're probably a late developer. Now what we see here is a photo of a really good example of an early developer who has hit their growth spurt early. He's 210 centimeters. He's over 100 kilograms in weight. Anybody would like to guess what age he is? He's 12. Okay, this is a classic example of a boy who's naturally going to be tall, but has entered the growth spurt much earlier. And as I said, the variation in terms of which children reach the growth spurt is huge. This is data from my colleague Xavi Monasterio from Atlético Bilbao, and they've been collecting data on the growth spurts of their children for over 10 years. And these are children from the ages of 9 onwards, where they've got regular measurements. And as you can see, some of the early developing boys, they're into the growth spurt, maybe 10 or 11 years of age. But some of the later developing boys, it might not be 14 to 15 until they hit the growth spurt. And again, keep in mind, these are football players. Football players tend to be early developers. If we were to look at some of the late developers in the general population, we might get some people hitting their growth spurt around here. So this makes it very difficult when working with young athletes to alter training programs, because they all hit the growth spurt at the same time. And we generally group them by age groups, which makes it challenging. Now, the growth spurt itself presents a lot of challenges for young children. If you think about it, all of a sudden the body is changing. My feet aren't where they used to be. My legs are much longer. All of a sudden I've got strength where I never had strength before. And what we found in the football academies at Southampton is when we actually look at player grades and performance, they go down during the growth spurt, which makes it very challenging, because if you're coming up to a selection decision and you're in your growth spurt, well, you're going to look pretty poor. You're not going to look very well at all. If we're evaluating you, then we may release you. But what happens is after the growth spurt, performance comes back up. We see this in ballet, we see it in gymnastics. It's a concept called adolescent awkwardness. It's the child adapting to those sudden changes, which can make them look a little bit clumsier than normal. But here's the big one that the academies are worried about. It's the injuries. And injuries are really important in academies. The biggest #1 factor predicting whether you will get a contract at an academy Premier League football club is how much time you spent out injured. If you're injured, you're not playing. If you're injured, you're not developing. So we need to reduce the injuries. And the injuries tend to spike during the growth spurt. We get a big rise in terms of overuse injuries and a big increase in terms of stress fractures at this point of time. Now, why does this occur? Well, it makes sense. The bones are suddenly growing incredibly rapidly. And if we look at the physical plates of the bones, they become very sensitive and fragile at that point in time. And if we overload an athlete and we expose them to compressive or tension forces, we're going to get injuries occurring at that point in time. The bone itself is also less resistant, so it's very susceptible to erosion. So if we're overloading an athlete in terms of repetitive movements, you're going to see those injuries start to present. And again, in some areas, such as the apophysis, so where the tendons and the ligaments attach to the bones, that area of the bone is very soft at that point. And if you overload it, you'll get these malformations occurring at that point. That's when you get severs, that's when you get Osgood-Schlatters, if you overload a child at this point in their development. So really, it's a perfect storm for injuries when we look at bone growth. Other reasons why we get this increased risk of injury? Well, one of the first ones is the asynchrony in terms of growth of the skeleton and then growth of the soft tissues. As I said, Professor Maliny has always talked about this in his presentations. When it comes to children, when we grow them, we stretch them out and then we fill them out. Now, when we stretch them out, but those soft tissues, the muscles, the tendons haven't caught up yet, we lose a lot of motion. We lose a lot of ability in terms of mobility and flexibility. Ballet dancers who could get their legs up here are struggling to get their legs up to there at that point of time. And that predisposes them to increased risk. As I said before, we get changes in terms of adolescent awkwardness, pain coming in, changes in physique, changes in relative strength, particularly with girls when we get a decline in relative strength because they're putting on weight, but they're not putting on the same level of muscle as the boys. And here's a big factor to increased training and competition load. As children get older, particularly in specialization sports, the increased competition load goes up. And if you're a late developing gymnast or a ballet dancer, when you go through your growth spurt, it might be 20 or 30 hours worth of training you're doing per week. And if you're trying to grow at that point of time, it's going to be very difficult. Increased risk of injury. Types of injuries we see typically peaking during adolescence. A lot of injuries to the growth plate, sclerosis, stress fractures, and the lower back, spondylosis and pars. Apophyseal injuries, so those injuries where the tendons and the ligaments are attaching to the bones, the classic severs and Auschwitz-Schlatters. And of course, in females, we see a sudden increase in terms of ACL, MCL, knee-related injuries. You look at children, boys and girls, there's no difference in terms of injuries. All of a sudden, puberty comes along, there is a 4 to 5-fold increase for girls for injuries related to the knee. And it makes sense. Those girls are putting on weight. Those boys are putting on weight, but the boys are putting on lots of muscle mass. The girls are not putting on the same level of muscle mass. So when they stop, they decelerate, they turn, they don't have the same level of strength as the boys. So this is why strength training is probably more important for girls when you're going through these phases of development. As I said, common injuries that we see during adolescent growth spurt, classic stress fractures. Now, about 40% of all injuries with children going to the hospital typically are around stress fractures. And commonly, most of those have occurred in the context of sport. Other ones we see, particularly in gymnastics, is sclerosis of the wrist. So if we have a young gymnast who's growing and the growth plate hasn't fused at that point of time, and we're overloading them with tumbling, with vaulting, which puts a lot of pressure on the wrists, you'll start to see that you'll get degradation at this point. In some parts of the wrist where there's big wide gaps, and that will cause a lot of inflammation and pain. The estimations in gymnasts is about 40% of all gymnasts will experience this. In a study of Brazilian gymnasts, training 20 to 30 hours per week, 70% of them had this. And again, this is one of the dangers as to why you need to be aware of when the children are going through these rapid phases of growth. Another one very common in football is Sever's disease. So that's a problem where you get inflammation around the calcaneus, which is the growth plate at the back of the heel. And of course, that's caused by compressive factors pushing up as the children are running around, but also tension forces from the Achilles coming down here attached to this area as well. And again, a lot of football players, you will see those types of injuries. You'll see children hobbling off the field, feel that their shoes are too tight. It's a classic example of severs. The other common one that we see in soccer is Auschwitz-Schlatters. About 20% of all male soccer players will experience Auschwitz-Schlatters. And again, what's happening here is we've got the patella tendon attached here to the top of the tibia, and again, it's putting excess stress onto that area. The bone is changing. Sometimes we may get fatty deposits building up here as well. And again, it causes a lot of inflammation, and it's very difficult for the child to act. Now, the big problem with this takes the boys out of training. If they aren't training, they're not developing. They're not developing, they're not going to be selected. But in addition, these injuries predict future injuries. So these types of boys who pick up those injuries, that injury will hang around for 2 years for them. So in terms of the development, it's really problematic. And of course, we know that these injuries typically follow the growth spurt. This was data taken from a big study in England with the Football Association, tracking injuries across all of the academies, looking at when those injuries occur. And look when they peak in terms of their top incidence. It's the under 13s, under 14s, and that's where you get this big rise in terms of injury incidence. And this makes sense because that's when the boys are going through their growth spurt. And what's fascinating here as well is look at the severs. The severs peaks before the osgood slatters. And this makes sense. Remember what I said about distal to proximal? Your feet grow first, then the lower legs grow. So it makes sense that we see severs before we see osgood slatters. Further evidence that growth is playing a role in this. And perhaps some of the best evidence to suggest this comes again from Xavi Monsterio with his 10-year study at Atlético Bilbao. Now, what he did is he looked over 10 years of historical medical data, and he found out exactly when every injury had occurred, and he compared those injuries relative to percentage of adult stature. Now, the growth spurt typically is peaking in this zone here, 88 to 94% of adult stature. When we combine all of the growth-related injuries, this is where the cluster occurs. But what's fascinating, if we look at severs, the cluster is earlier, 85, 86%. Osgood slatters, it's somewhere in the middle, usually around 90 to 91. But if we look at the lower back-related problems, if we look at PARS, if we look at spondylosis, those are typically occurring around 96. And again, this makes sense. The feet grow, the legs grow, and then the torso grows. So these legs that we see here are clearly reflecting a gradient of the growth spurt. As I said, some of the later injuries tend to be those associated with the last parts of the body to grow. So obviously football players, football academies, gymnastic academies, we don't want our athletes hurt. It's not a good publicity sign if our athletes are going out getting hurt. Nobody wants to join our clubs, but we also need to produce young, talented players. We've got to keep them healthy. So how do we go about doing that? Well, the first and foremost thing is measurement. You've got to be measuring children from an early age. Now, in the Premier League academies, we measure from 9 years of age. And that's because some of those boys will be taking off in the growth spurt at 9 years of age. Some of the academies, we have the boys from 6 in England. So some of those academies are measuring even earlier. So if we take regular assessments of growth and maturity, we can then understand where they are in the growth curve and when they're maybe going into the zones. Once they go into the zones, we reduce the training, we reduce the competition load to make it a little less pressure for the children at that point of time. But what we also do is we prescribe appropriate training content, things that the children need at that point of time, which will help them manage and deal with the growth spurt. Coordination, core strength, all those kind of key things which they will need to help them adapt at that point. And a lot of the ideas behind this come from this fellow here, Jan de Montunis, and a good colleague who's applying a lot of these principles at Ajax Football Club. And I'll give you some insight in terms of the success he had there and how we've replicated them in the English Premier League. In terms of assessing and monitoring, quarterly measures of height, mass. Some of the academies will be getting a measure of leg length, as we know a lot of these injuries are occurring in the leg length, so we want to know when that part of the body is growing most rapidly. And of course, we get the biological parent height, which allows us to predict things such as growth velocity, but also the percentage of predicted adult stature. So with these types of measures being taken on a regular basis, we can understand how fast the children are growing in terms of the growth velocities, but we can also count down to the growth spurt by focusing on that percentage of predicted adult stature. And as Bob said earlier, we know that that typically peaks at 90 to 91%. So the closer the children are getting, the more we can predict that they're likely to be experiencing these injuries, the more we can adapt the training quite early. Now, this is how you'll do it in the academies in England. We may have 3 boys, all of the same age, but at different levels of their maturity. One is at 82, one is at 91, and one is at 99. Well, if we're organizing them for training, and we're trying to understand them in terms of the risks or what type of training would be most effective for them, we can use that indicator. This boy over here, 82, he's a long way from the growth spurt. He's maybe just starting to take off, but relatively little risk. If there is a risk, it's probably severs, because that's the first part that's going to be growing. So we might watch out for that. In terms of his training, mostly working on technique. We can't get him big. He doesn't have testosterone there. He's not going to experience some hypertrophy. In contrast, this boy over here, he's smack in the middle of the growth spurt. We're watching him like a hawk. The physio is watching him. The coach is watching him. The medical staff are watching him. The sports scientists are watching him. He's the sort of boy who's at probably the greatest risk for picking up those types of injuries. Contrast with this boy, he's through the growth spurt. We really don't have those concerns. In fact, the concerns for this boy is probably more muscle-related injuries that you can be picking up at this point of time. So it gives a little bit of a way to understand where the athletes are in their development. We're not just doing this for football, we're doing it for tennis. This is a mock-up of the systems we set up for the Lawn Tennis Association. They measure all of their top players in tennis in the United Kingdom. We have a boy here at 92%. Well, he's in the middle of his growth spurt. We've got the red flag there, and we have to watch him. We can also look in terms of his growth velocity. Well, he's at 9.2 centimeters per year. That's a lot higher than we would expect in childhood. Childhood is 4 to 5 centimeters. So this confirms to us that this boy is in the middle of his growth spurt. In addition, 7.4 kilograms per year. He's starting to go through peak weight velocity as well. This is a boy who's prime risk for injury. And of course, with the LTA, it gives you considerations. What should a coach be doing? What should a physio be looking for? And any information relative to this boy is shared in here. So the coaching staff see it, the academy manager sees it, the physios see it. You can share as much information as possible. So once you have this information, well, what do? Well, this is the system I came up with. It's called the 3-phase model. Phase 1, they call the golden years. They call it monkey see, monkey do. Children are just children. They're growing steadily. There's no growth spurt to worry about. Emphasis here is on having fun, technique, skills, because that's what kids are great at. But as soon as they go into this phase 2, that's where awkwardness kicks in. They lose their skills, but also they're at increased risk of injury. So what we do is we adapt the training program in this phase to reduce that likelihood of injury. Once they get to phase 3, we can then ramp up the training, we can ramp up the conditioning, we can introduce hypertrophic type training, new forms of training to push them. But at this phase, phase 2, we have to be very careful with them. Now this is an example of some boys, all of exactly the same age, all from the same age group in Ajax, but they're all in different phases of their development. This wee lad here, he's still in the monkey see phase 1 stage. He's still a little boy. This fellow here, very similar age, he's in phase 2, so he would go into the movement classes to reduce the risk of injury. This is actually Matthias de Ligt here from Ajax, who went on to play for Juventus, who's currently with Juventus, classic early developer. He's already out of phase 2, so he's out of that risk zone at that point. So 3 boys, different ages, different phases of their development. So what did Ajax do? Well, the first thing they did is to reduce their training load and their competition load. In Ajax, you play 2 games per week. Big important game of the weekend. It's a low-level game in the middle of the week. Those boys would normally play 2 games per week. Now you're only playing 1 game per week. When it came to the conditioning programs, your football training, 50% of your program was in these movement classes, which are low intensity and not stressing the boys. When they went into the movement classes, they would take off their shoes. Okay, because it's hard to do high intensity without any shoes on. You used a lot of cushion surfaces, balance disruptive surfaces to work upon coordination and balance. And a lot of activities working on things such as flexibility, which was being lost at that point in time, and core, upper body and lower body strength, which was going to give them the skill and the strength to adapt to the changes in their body and make that transition much more effectively. And here was a key thing as well, with these players, you had to make it fun. These are the kind of activities they would do at Ajax. They would have these sessions which were on padded floors. They would actually throw out this cleaning chemical on the floor to make it really, really slippy for the boys. So they're in there, and that's Matthias de Ligt again up there in the top corner, and they're running around the floor trying to move this ball, working on their balance. Some of the activities, they would be sliding across the floor, trying to stop at certain points, all having a lot of fun, but it wasn't high intensity, they're not getting injured. This activity here, they're working on mobility, but also core strength. As I said, the floor is very slippy because they put down this slippery on the floor. And so what happens is you push the boy along there, but he's trying to hold that shape at the same time. Lots of work here again with tension lines and balance lines, working on coordination. Again, the types of things they would also do is they would take benches, turn them upside down, give them water jugs. They're trying to balance while holding a water jug at the same time. Again, working on core strength, working on balance and coordination. And this is actually Sam Blanchard, who's now in Manchester City, doing similar things there. This is an activity he was doing at Brighton with the boys in the middle of the growth spurt. What he would do is he would take them out and do hand-eye coordination activities, sometimes on crash mats with disruptive surfaces or balance balls, just to make them fine-tune them in those particular areas. Now, the nice thing about this was when I spoke to Jan Willem, he said, look, the boys didn't get injured. They weren't overloaded. They came through that phase and they went on and played afterwards. And the nice thing too as well was that they transitioned much more effectively. Adolescent awkwardness was not so much of a concern. So We got wind of this at the Premier League, and not surprisingly, all the Premier League clubs were very interested in putting in similar programs. Arsenal have a similar program, Southampton have a similar program. We actually tested the program with my PhD student, David Johnson, at Bournemouth Academy. So what we did is we basically took the Ajax program, we implemented it there, but we did it on a small scale. We only changed 1 day of training per week for players who were in the middle of their growth spurt. Tuesday was normal football training. Wednesday was growth spurt training. Okay, all the soft feet were off. A lot of work on balance and coordination. A lot of key things and fundamental movement skills. All those types of activities that they were doing at Ajax. And we also took the boys out of futsal, because futsal involves a lot of sudden stops and breaks. Not a good activity if you're in the middle of the growth spurt. And what we did is we found at-risk players, so anybody between 88 to 94% of adult height, anybody growing more than 7 centimeters in the ear, or more than 3.5 centimeters in the lower legs. If you hit 2 of those criteria, you go into the movement program. If you hit 3 of those criteria, you go into the movement program. And that movement program lasted for 3 months. At the end of 3 months, we then reevaluated. Those boys who are still in the risks, they stay in the program. Some boys might move into the program, and some boys might exit the program at that point of time. So for the entire academy year, we ran that program. And again, just 90 minutes on a Wednesday to see if we could reduce the injuries. And of course, when we look back at the previous season, and that was our comparison data, there was a big spike of injuries during the growth start. So we ran it for a year, we went back and we analysed the data. This was, as I kind of said, the kind of things that we were doing. We were looking at about 90 minutes of the overall session. And these were our kind of key focuses that we were looking at. We ran it at the end of the season. We looked at the injury incidence and the injury burden. So the incidence is the numbers of injuries that occurred. Injury burden is the time out or the days lost due to injury. What we had was something really, really positive. In terms of injury incidence during the growth spurt, a reduction of 72%. So a lot less injuries through the season when we ran this program with these boys. And then when we looked at the injury burden, we had a massive decrease, more than 90% reduction in terms of days lost. David has recently calculated how many days the actual club gained back in terms of training. They gained over 120 days worth of training back by simply implementing this program. So while a coach might get upset if you say, well, I'm taking the boy out every week, but if I can give you 120 days back of training, they're very, very happy with it. So some really good success that came from this program, suggesting that what they were doing at Ajax can definitely work in England as well. This is the actual data from the analysis. It's currently in revision with Journal of Sports Sciences. This here are the boys who had either no risk factors or maybe 1 risk factor. So these boys did not go into an intervention. And if we compare the season with no intervention versus the season where we had an intervention, there's no difference at all between these boys. But if we look over here at the boys that were the high risk who went into the programs, well, not much of a difference if you only have 2 risks, but if you've got 3 of those risk factors, you're above 7 centimeters in growth, more than 3 centimeters in terms of lower body. If you're in that 88 to 94% band, that's where we get the major reductions in terms of injury. And as I said, this is absolutely vital because those boys who are getting injured, they are nursing those injuries for 2 years afterwards. They are losing a lot of game time. Some of those boys previously, they had been injured and out for the entire season. They hadn't played any football at all. The chances of them getting a contract at Bournemouth, very, very small. So keeping the boys healthy, keeping the boys active, keeping the boys learning is of key importance. And what we also did with this analysis is we went back to the previous season. We wanted to look at the interaction between growth rate and maturity status. So here we have maturity status, and of course the middle of the growth spurt is here. And of course these are the children who are growing most rapidly. Some of them might get up to 15 centimeters at any point of time during the growth spurt. So 15 centimeters per year, very, very high. And what we did is we created a heat map, often used in epidemiology, to find the point of the highest risk. Of course, look where the point of the highest risk is. It's about 91% of adult stature, and for those boys who are growing most rapidly. So now, when we're in the academies and we can look at the growth velocity, we're looking at the status, we can plot where those boys are relative to those heat maps and identify those athletes who are at most risk. Since we ran the intervention, analysed the data for the following season, This is what we get. You completely wiped out that risk at that point of time. If anything, what's happened is the risk has kind of moved down to the bottom part. It's a lower risk, but it's down in that area. And that's probably reflecting the fact that we have some boys coming out of the growth spurt who might have hip-related problems, or maybe lower back problems, where they were still maybe growing at that point of time, or maybe also some muscular injuries, which are more likely to present at that point of time. But in terms of challenging and mitigating that growth spurt-related injuries, we can have great success with that. And of course, this is why we're now implementing this in ballet. We're doing exactly the same thing with British gymnastics, because those are sports and activities where we get a lot of injuries through the growth spurt. And the final thing I would say that these clubs are doing is they're also considering the issue around performance. Now, as I said earlier, when we looked at Southampton's data, we found that the performance of these boys goes down as they go through the growth spurt. We have 5 years worth of match performance data. And prior to the growth spurt, great performers, middle of the growth spurt, bad performers. After the growth spurt, they look brilliant again. Now, this has implications. If I'm making a scholarship decision on a boy, and I know that he is right in the middle of his growth spurt at that point of time, then what I'm seeing is not reality. What I'm seeing is the growth spurt. And it's very likely that I will get rid of this boy because I don't think he's a good player. And the fellow that you see here in the photo is a really good example of this. Do you know who that is? Played for Real Madrid, Gareth Bale. Okay, probably the most successful player to come out of Southampton. Gareth Bale went through his growth spurt at 15 years of age. He looked awful. Previously, he had been a brilliant player, top player in the academy, but a late developer went through his growth spurt. Coaches were like, oh, this boy looks terrible. He survived his vote for a scholarship by 1 vote. Fortunately, one of the medical staff said, this boy's in his growth spurt. Let's take him aside. Let's work on his skills. Let's work on his strength, work on his mobility. And they kept him. And they're very lucky that they kept him because they sold him to Tottenham for about 20, 30 million afterwards. Made a lot of money out of it. But this is the concern. If we have a talented player and we're making that decision at that point in time, it's difficult. So Southampton Football Club now will not make a decision on a player if they are in the middle of the growth spurt. They will extend the contract for another 6 months to make that decision. They will also go back and look at game film. Was this player always terrible? You look at his current game film, balls here and it's going everywhere. But you look at him when he was 9, look at him when he was 10. Fantastic, superb player. Actually, he's a good player. Let's keep him. Let's work him through that point of time. But some of those boys, they struggle psychologically, so sometimes we might actually ask them to play down at that point. It's less of a challenge. It gives them more opportunity and time to adapt to their game, particularly if they're competing against big early developing boys and you're going through your growth spurt. It's going to be challenging. So in some of those instances, we'd ask the player to play down. And again, the big benefit here is we're not releasing those players simply because they're in the middle of their growth spurt. So the take-home messages: growth spurt is real, it occurs to everybody, but it's highly variable, and we need to be aware of that. If we measure on a regular basis, we can predict it, we can identify when it's occurring. And if we can do that, we can adjust the environment appropriately. We can't change the rate at which children grow, we can't change the age at which they grow, but what we can do is change our expectations, our behaviours, and how we treat them. And if we can do that, certainly from the evidence from Bournemouth, from the evidence from Ajax, there's no doubts about it, we can reduce the injuries within these cohorts. So thank you for your attention. And if you do have any of the questions about the work that we're doing in the Premier League, ballet, gymnastics, feel free to ask them. I'm more than happy to share the insights in terms of the work that we do. Thank you.
For this practice, was like very information how to transmit some theory to practice, and we are very happy.
Colleagues, Jan Konarski requested me for presenting here, which I believe is very easy, is explaining at home. However, I would like to have your attention. Konarski appeared in 2013
while we were organizing the anti-food pathology meeting. I always see a lot of enthusiasm and the long-term investment, and you are doing a great job. That's the trajectory that we want for future research. Choose a topic, being persistent, and improve the quality every day. Thank you. I'm glad to work with you.
Thank you very much. Also, it's important for me to speak some information about our part of realization of project. And of course, I'm not lonely. I must say that our cooperation is great thanks to our mentor, Professor Maliny, and also colleagues. I will speak about it in some moment. Of course, it is very important for us that we have a PhD student who started jump on very deep water and decided to do something what was not recognized in Poland in this element, and I will speak about this in some moment. We are a very important place historically. Pałac Działyńskich is a very important place for the founder of our university, Kaliodor Święcicki, who created an idea to return to Poznania's University when Poland wasn't on the map of Europe. We were under occupation, but he traveled a lot. He was a physician, gynecologist, and tried to find a lot of information how to improve himself, how be good doctor, good person to support others, and said to her wife, they started here in this place, in this building, prepare private hospital to help women to find new solution to cure different kind of illnesses. Now we can say that here is also a very important place where was meetings which transmit, which exchange very important information. Here was visit good musician, for example, it is symbol of, for example, this equipment, poetries, politics, and other people who has something to stay. After freedom in 1990, was created Poznania's University in Free Poland. Kaliodor Święcicki invited Agnieszka Piasecki, patron of our university, to create first in Poland and Europe, third in Europe, Department of School Hygienic and Physical Education, which start look at physical activity in a very important way. That physical activity is health, it's support for people who do different things, and now we have more than 100 years and we enjoy to other contact. Of course, contacts are very important, and as Professor Silva stated, it is a very important point in my history map, but first meeting with Professor Maliny was for me in 2005 in Rimini during Sport Genetics conference, and from that time we had small contact, and next was more and more opportunity to meet. We invited Professor first time to Poznan 2008, and next I have honored to be invited to Coimbra, and thanks to this visit, I started to cooperate with Sean and with Manuel. I had honored to invite them to Szczecin, and then I heard first time about biobanding idea, which is very close to my heart because I was physical education teacher and also coach, and it is something what was sound in my brain, but it was a key to find and reorganize my work. We visited with Mateusz Bath in 2019 to find some details to program we started fulfill in 2017. What is the aim? The aim is summary of some our ideas and what we do and what we plan in the coming future. Background concept and application was presented by Professor as well as is published in some articles, and I've tried to show something from our side. Why we do interest of this topic. It is very important that among adolescents in this same chronological age, we have a lot of differences. There is a lot of area of different elements which physical education teacher or coach or even every teacher should know to support enough good young people. It is very important also that in some studies of youth athletes are following contrast, different contrast and different elements which are taken into consideration. The sport is highly selective and realistic, mostly on early maturing youth than another. Now, of course, it's a little change because in Poland we started, I will speak in some minute about it, some change, and we try to find late maturity. But whether it is good way or next blindly thinking about youth. Sports focus most for males and female. Now we hope that we will change also this element. And basic questions which we took in the Officer Clinic, we cooperate with the staff, how to use biological knowledge in sport more consciously. It is very important to get to know how to work with those people. Chronological age, as shown, show very nice line and tracks. Is of course very hypothetical. We can see this same boys in different size. It's one of my favorites in the picture when we have we can see 5 years differences in biological development, and when I was a small boy, I would discover that my colleagues is growing like a big wall on me. Youth sports largely are organized in different kind of division. We divide kids in different form for the chronological age, for some skills, for weight, for another restriction could be presented as a point. But is it enough good and enough precise? We could also observe maturity matching, which is grouping athletes relative to attitudes associated with process of maturation. But it is often mentioned, but not systematically applied. This is why we think and we believe that the biomedical concept use is approached realistically, more realistically than others. Biomedical, as Professor stated, is a recent effort to prepare new division. And what is the most important for me, and yesterday when we started discussing about some point of our presentation, at the time of observation, some different indexes are prepared before, in some months, some years, and everybody catch this point and use it as the only one true. We want to be at this moment, in this place, and we work with people who are exactly at this moment in all the different level of maturity. Biomedical is a very useful tool, but requires some elements. Understanding biological maturation and theory and practice of training. Very often people know only one little part and use all things as truth. Awareness of limitations. Very often it is the most important point to use it in practice and, for example, omit some injuries. It is not simply formula which is blindly applied, but we must awareness of context. And this context should be presented on the 2 slides from my point. First of all, it is 3 magic words: growth, maturation, and development, which show how not easy is observing, developing body and a special person. because it's not only body, but it's also soul, it's also feeling, it's also different elements of human being. We build self-concept, self-esteem, body image, and perceived competence. We build persons who could be very good and could be destroyed psychologically by coach, because nobody would be aware what other side feels, and we must take also this into consideration. Actual training and competition use you under different elements of under, but it is of course mostly chronological age. When we look at system of long-term sports training of players, we of course know this element, because here our training stage, every elements are very important, but without using biomechanics, for example, in the right place, we could omit very important changes for the future. When we put this element to the system, we could think about more realistic element and the effect of our work. Very important is also scientific support, which could show us that it is something like process of assessment, checking, but especially support whether we do everything right and like we should do. How we use biobending? Biobending, like Professor showed, it's bands, flexible bands we could adopt dependent on our team we cooperate with. When we have some elements, like we, for example, cooperate with pizza, some U from U10 to U16, and we prepare some division, we just do some element of this to put element of bench to subgroups, and it's radically new quality of training. Very often it is something new, and kids who has no idea how to work start working on the very, very nice new level. Biobending is not only some elements and only some quotations and some bands. It is system of evaluation, education, and implementation. And we must remember about this, that we should learn, spend the time, and go deeper and deeper to some element of our thinking. How different is this application in Poland from other countries which start to do it much earlier? Especially, I would like to show this on the example of our early research and material methods. Would be some example of soccer players, male field hockey players, and tennis table. Methods are generally known and presented before, and I would like to show some elements and results of our common research, joint research. Chronological age versus skeletal age. When I show first time this graph, I wonder what's going on. Here, this blue line, it's chronological age. It's every point, it's one sample. These red dots are also these same players, but it's skeletal age. I wonder what mistake I should do during preparation of this slide, and this I show this bigger one dots. Why they are so long distance each other? It's boys in the same age. When I started to check, everything was under control and everything was perfect. And what I saw, it is X-ray. We prepare first method skeletal age analysis thanks to Professor Maliny and Professor Sipa, and we found the differences between these boys is 0.1 years, because this boy has 10.2, almost 2, and this 10.3 years. But this man from skeletal age was 7.5, and this boy was 13.3. Differences in the age was almost the same, 3 years, but this boy was younger, boy was older, and differences between them and skeletal age was almost 6 years. It was interesting to analyze. When we prepare another analysis and look at variation of the results, look at this point. This point it is mean value of chronological age. This point is mean value of skeletal age. We could assess the differences between range of this and show on this picture. The biggest differences and varia we stated in under 12 group 3.2 years. As we can see, in normal chronological age competitive groups, we have from 11 to 12.6-year-old kids, and realistic skeletal age was from 11 to 14. Whether the same boys in this same group or different. Sometimes we observe different emotion, different reactions. We can state it that some other is better and worse, but what are the points to assess it? We must take into consideration biological changes according to the age. And it is percent of predicted adult height attended to the time of observation when we could also observe in under group different range of this specific observation. The same we stated according to Polish Youth Tennis Table. We prepared with Professor Maliny article, and I would like to show some part of Polish part of analysis. Then we observed male, and the biggest differences was one boy who was 3.3 years older than normal chronological age. In the girls was the same, almost more than 3 years. One girl who was 14 was general adult. We can see some examples of this. Conclusions of this research was that we must take into consideration real biological age to assess and to win. We need to consider also maturity, which could support player during the training. Coaches' perception of youth. We prepare some analysis which in some part was presented by Professor Maliny. But I would like to show some analysis from our point and from the point of our colleagues who assess it as coaches. General, we have two groups, selected and non-selected. Before the end of the season, coaches decided who will stay in the big club and who will leave this club. Differences was in the basic maturity status, of course, significant for the boys who was selected. On the other hand, when we started analyzing different elements of body size, proportion, and composition, we stated that these boys who was in significant difference between these groups. When we took into consideration covariance as an age square, and biological age minus chronological age to exclude some elements of biological maturation, there was no significant differences between this group. Wow, what's going on? There was significant differences and here not. Maybe it's something important. When we observe some other elements, we stated that, for example, in fitness element, boys was also different, significantly different in between the groups, but it was stated in the vertical jump and some of both left and right hands. What means that this boys was more advanced in strength, what is typical for earlier maturing boys. Similar elements was assessed by coaches who has opportunity to state it, who has good technical skills in attack, defense, general creativity, usefulness in play, and overall potential. There was typical for earlier maturing advantage boys than later maturing or not selected, which should sometimes have longer time to be a little better. In conclusion, the highlight advantages of advanced biological maturity status among adolescent male soccer players and also importance of coach perception of talent. This player is better who do something more. But what does it mean for the future? That is the question. Variation biobasic compared to chronological age group youth soccer player, which was presented in Swansea last year, was aimed to compare variation between chronological and skeletal age and another between group of classical competitive chronological age group and biobasic group. We assess two groups. It was U10 under 10 to biobending. One, it was pure takeoff. There was some elements significantly different. It was chronological age, percent of predicted at the high, and as well vertical jump. The most interesting finding was in next between takeoff and PH this line. And U12 differences were changes of looking at kids by the biological maturation could give completely different assess of this group. And we were very positively shocked that, for example, in next group where we assess on the level of PH or PH, there was no significant differences between the groups. And we concluded that it is very important that results highly the potential utility of biobending among youth players pure to the adolescent growth too. Percentage of predicted adult high appears to be independent of skeletal age growth to the adolescent group. Another element we tried to represent in Szczecin in our teams was to compare players from the smaller and great club around Sympozjum. We observe boys from U13 and 16, and there was no significant differences among this presented element of the status of maturation. When we start assess some elements according to results with excluding some elements as a covariance, we stated that excluding and put into the analysis some elements of biological maturation start differ significantly as these boys we assess. The most differences was stated among the physical activity, where most elements we assessed was statistically significant, especially in younger boys group than in older groups. Of course, it could be easy to think and to find this analysis, but when we show that it is real true. Significant differences were noted in physical fitness in most traits favoring players from big cities. Why? Especially because it is differences that reflect the selection process, which is on the highest level in big cities and in small town. A short application for the air. When we met in Szczecin and Malgocin in 2016, Sean put me on such pitch, and I prepare similar because I would like to show some more people story that I didn't personalize this, but I stay some elements because it's some working what stated to me that it works at last. We organize in Kotwica a competition where first of all we put everybody in competitive age group and they play. After this, we have measurements. We prepare some days before the competition, and we calculate the percent of predicted high, and we reorganize the match. We try to put some bands on the pitch. We observe, we discuss, we ask kids about some comments, and just Mateusz prepare some analysis of this, and I hope that very soon we'll be able to present you as new topic. What is novelties? Novelties is that after 5 years of continuation of our study and our experience, we were invited by to cooperation with Wielkopolska Soccer Association to recognize individual rates of biological maturation to optimize training, and especially to look at late maturing, but we add, of course, early maturing and on-time maturing, because for us, every kids, every youth are very important. Not only early or late, everybody are very important for us. And according to earlier presentation, I'm very proud that our group presented in Poznań, and I hope that we will be able to show it also in different part of Poland, because we observe that the PHV is the most important for some of people. It's of course okay, but when we observe some analysis, we prepare according to this observation. We calculate, for example, chronological age. This blue line, this orange line is biological age. We could find its case study. We have no information about significant differences. Here is percentage of predicted adult height, and we assess according to national reference data the percentile of body stature, body mass, and BMI. As we can see, I put on this graph also predicted age of PHV on the basis of maturity observed by Miller, which was assessed on the 13.7. It's somewhere here. As we can see, the biggest differences and Stroud could start about 1 year later than was assessed. It is very important information for us, and it confirmed also Sean and Professor that individual line is different, and we should firstly assess who is early, who is on time or late maturing to address some conclusion to this first. As conclusions, each maturing organism is different, as has personal variability, and it should be treated individually, which becomes particularly important in sport, since the young athlete must combine the effort of biological changes with training loads. An example which was presented by Sean. According to our trial, we suggest to one big club in Poznań to reduce overload injuries, and it was start well. But unfortunately, they had no time to continue our observation. Training should take into consideration not only the level of fitness preparation, but combination of biological fitness and psychological aspect of growth and maturation. Coaches' notes should be replaced by concrete scientific results, as we try to present. Excellence takes time, and speeding up the nature promotes an increased risk of injuries and overload injuries, affecting adult sports career and non-sports life. Some potential application should go to recognize variation among young players, accommodate maturity associated variation, educate coaches and parents to the need of accommodate individual differences, and especially to be brave to learn and make wise changes for the future of the youth. And don't be afraid to be pioneer, to find good questions and try to answer all these questions, like Professor show us how to do it. Professor Little show how it's important to find good mentor and be with mentor for the question and find the answer. And my colleagues also that it is very important to play in the team. And I'm very proud that our Poznania's team we construct and we prepare has very nice support and international support. And I think that maybe there are not everybody who should be here, but it's team which is flexible and very open to cooperation. And thank you very much everybody who has part in this team, and excuse everybody who are not here from the picture. And I will add some next people. Thank you for your attention. Dear friends, dear sirs, I don't know.
No, conclude, please.
I would like to ask whether we have any questions, any conclusions, any summary, because now probably it should be some opportunity to a little discuss. I know that we discussed in the break, but our association, we have here also honor to represent, try to give a little time to discussion after every presentation. This time it was a little different. Sympozjum has a little different rules, but also if anybody would like to say some comments, please do it now. If anybody would like to speak in Polish, I could try to translate it. In Spanish, I think that it is possible that somebody from our Erasmus knows English and Spanish. In English, it's of course easy to speak in English, you can speak in English. And Portuguese would be supported by Professor. Yes, please.
Okay.
Professor Tomasz Podgórski.
Thanks very much. I have a short question to the show.
Yes.
It's very interesting for me, but I know it's not free from. It is true that introduce the training, physical training to children, which not mature, can reduce the growth process.
No, if anything, the strength training, if it's delivered appropriately, will support the growth. We know that physical activity is important for children to grow and develop. The key thing is to provide the appropriate strength training. So I would recommend you read the work of Rodri Lloyd and John Oliver, who have done a lot of work looking at strength training for children, should focus on neuromuscular adaptation. So technique, plyometrics, that will be the most successful for young children. For hypertrophy, you cannot do that until much, much later because the children lack the underlying physiology. But strength training should be an important part of the program for all children from a very early age. But early on, it's very much technique. At Arsenal's Academy, they will have the boys learning all the Olympic lifts from the ages of 9 years of age. But all they're using is a broomstick. It is all about technique. But when they get to the point when they're ready, they have the technique. It doesn't take 2 more years to teach them before you get your benefits. So I think strength training, but appropriate strength training from an early age is very, very good. So prevent from injury and also make the boys better performers. And then once they get to the stage where you can get hypertrophy, if you're measuring growth and maturation, you'll know when that occurs and you can do it safely. So yeah, strength training is good.
Okay, thank you very
You're
much.
welcome.
Keywords.
I would like to agree with that.
Could you stay here because here is a better online?
Yes.
Could you tell us how many training sessions the kid age 9 of years have in the week, on the weekend?
Okay, so for the 9-year-olds in the English academies, So they will be in, usually they'll have a game at the weekend and they may have two training sessions. But the training sessions in England, we focus very much upon skill and fun and play to begin with. I was recently doing some photo shoots with Southampton's football club. They had tennis out there. They were playing all sorts of different fun games. So there is football, there is some strength conditioning, but it's done in a very playful manner because they recognize these are children. If you give them something boring like squats, they will get tired very quickly. So if you can make the strength training a fun, enjoyable activity, then yeah, that's what they will focus on. Once the boys get to the ages of 11 and onwards, then they are maybe coming in 2 to 3 days per week, and they will do some of their schooling also in the academies because they will have to take days out from school, but it is important they continue with their studies. There's only 1 in every 200 boys will become a professional football player. They will become bankers, cleaners, dentists, lots of different things. So we make sure that they come in, they get their training, the conditioning. I would say about 50% of their program is largely conditioning. Some soccer, some technique, but mostly conditioning at that point of time. But again, all focused upon neuromuscular adaptation. Nothing with big heavy weights, which is not appropriate for them at that point of time.
Yeah, I totally with you that strength training is really important. So this is the point that you have a special strength trainer, coaches, or
Yes.
this is the coach.
Yeah. So the Premier League is very lucky; it has lots of money. If you are a Category 1 academy, you will get 2 million per year to hire at least 18 sports scientists. So that's physios, medical staff, sports scientists, strength and conditioning experts, just to work with the children. And many of those clubs will invest more money on top of that. And so we have lots of specialist strength and conditioning people working specifically with the children. They're not just S&C people, but they know about developmental psychology, about growth and maturation. So the investment in the education the Premier League has put in has been incredible. And this is why England are becoming so good at developing young football players now. It's a pure investment. And as a Scotsman, I feel terrible because Scotland doesn't like England, and I should be helping Scotland next time. And maybe Poland, maybe I can come and help Poland as well. That would be good. But yeah, they're very, very fortunate in England. Big investment in youth sports, and it's the money that does it, allows it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. It was perfect, and I hope that in near future we will have opportunity to organize next meeting, personal or online or whatever, to keep this element. And if you have any questions, and if you have not enough opportunity to prepare these questions, please send it to us, and we try to support to find the answer of this. Thank you very much. So, please, for a moment, to me.
Okay.
And I would like to resume this.
How many stages? I know that's what.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like especially thank you very much. Thank you very much to Professor Roberta to be with us, to be our mentor, to be our teacher, and thanks and for the memory of this symposium. We would like to give you both this picture with Tomasz Jawiński, and every people who participate sign it for you and for Eva. Thank you to be with us, and Eva is in shadow, but it's very important also for us and like family. And please, we would like to give you this very much to have in memory. Yes, and also we would like to We'd like to thank you very much to Professor Brazil. Thank you, Bert. And of course, his wife, family, support us also and keep us good. Manuel? Thank you. Thank you. And of course, Sean, thank you very much.
Very welcome. Thank you.
Let me thank you everybody to spend time with us, to mental support, people who transmit to us a lot of positive energy. Thank you for representative, very important from Wrocław, Professor Ignacy and Professor Kozioł, who joined to us. Professor Marek Kaczmarek was also, and a lot of positive people, and a special thank you people who are with us on this stream. Thank you, and at this moment, please have very nice afternoon rest, and we will see tomorrow during the ceremony of the honoris causa for Professor Robert Malina at our Poznanian University of Physical Education University. Thank you. Goodbye. Have a good rest and good return. Teraz bardzo ważna rzecz.
Jeszcze jeden.
Jeszcze jeden.
One more.
Sypię, Mateusz, chodź teraz. Poprosimy Państwa, Panie Profesor, do Pana Profesora.
Dziękuję bardzo. Good job.